The rain hit the Chicago River Bridge like static, hard, sideways, relentless. Gideon Rusk stood in the dark beside his car, phone pressed to his ear, watching the armored SUV roll into position 200 yards ahead. He'd spent 11 years engineering this moment. His voice was calm, almost bored, when he gave the order. "Kill the convoy, leave no witnesses." He didn't know the woman in that SUV. He didn't care to. She was a loose thread, and loose threads unraveled empires. His empire. The one he'd spent a decade quietly stealing from the man who trusted him most. He hung up and watched the bridge light up with muzzle flash. He was already walking back to his car when the explosion swallowed the night. He never saw Dante Valen step out of the smoke. If you've ever loved someone so completely that losing them hollowed you out, if you've ever wondered whether the version of yourself you buried still exists somewhere, this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. Stay with us until the end. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the stories we tell here. Drop a like and leave a comment with your city or country. We genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Every comment tells us someone, somewhere, felt something real. Now, Chicago. 12 years of silence, and a burning bridge that changed everything. The operation was supposed to be clean. Dante Valen had received intelligence that a rival syndicate, the Harrow Group, out of Detroit, was moving a weapons shipment through the south corridor of the city. His source was a man named Pritchard, a customs broker who'd been feeding the syndicate information for 6 years without a single error. The convoy would cross the river bridge at 11:40 p.m., 3 vehicles, light security, a window of less than 4 minutes. Dante didn't lead operations anymore. That was what he paid captains for. But something had felt wrong since noon, a low-frequency unease he couldn't name, and he'd learned a long time ago that the feeling that had no name was usually the most important one. So he'd put on his coat, told Marcus, his bodyguard, his shadow, the only man he genuinely trusted, that they were going for a ride. He hadn't told Gideon. That detail would matter later. The bridge ambush went sideways in the first 30 seconds. The convoy was 3 vehicles as reported, but the security wasn't light. It was heavy, 6 men per vehicle, rotating formation, counter-surveillance positions already established on the bridge approaches. Whoever was moving this shipment had expected interference. Dante's team of 8 was outnumbered before they fired a single shot, and within 90 seconds, 2 of his men were down and the formation had collapsed into individual firefights across 200 yards of rain-soaked concrete. Dante moved through it the way he always had, not with rage, not with fear, but with that cold mechanical focus that had kept him alive since he was 19 years old and running errands for a man who eventually tried to have him killed. He moved toward the second vehicle in the convoy, the one his men had pinned against the center rail, because that was where the heaviest security was concentrated, and Dante had learned early that the thing people protect hardest is always the thing worth knowing about. He was 15 feet from the SUV when the driver's side window cracked open and a hand emerged, empty, palm out. Not a weapon. A surrender gesture. He'd seen a lot of things on a lot of bridges, but he hadn't seen that. "Dante," Marcus materialized at his shoulder, gun up, scanning. "We need to move. Left flank is... Hold." Dante raised his fist. His team stopped. The firefight was still crackling at the far end of the bridge, but here, in this pocket of rain and exhaust and burning rubber, everything went still. He stepped toward the SUV. "Open the door." The door swung outward. A woman climbed out. She was soaked through, hair plastered against her face, one hand pressed against her ribs like something hurt. She was wearing scrubs under a dark jacket. Hospital scrubs, pale green, the kind that doesn't belong anywhere near a weapons convoy. She got one foot on the asphalt and lifted her head. The moment Dante Valen saw her face, something in his chest stopped working. Not his heart. Something else. Some mechanism he hadn't known was still running. Serena. Not a ghost. Not a hallucination produced by stress and cold rain. Serena Ashcroft, standing on a bridge in Chicago at 11:42 p.m. Alive. Real. Close enough to touch. The last time he'd seen her, she was 26 years old and laughing at something he'd said, sitting at the kitchen table of a house he'd rented for them in Evanston, a house no one in the syndicate knew existed. He had been, for 3 weeks in that house, something close to a person. Then she was gone. No note, no call, nothing but an empty drawer and the particular quality of silence that means permanent. He'd spent 6 months looking for her. He told himself he was looking so he could understand. By month 7, he'd stopped lying to himself and admitted he was looking because the world made less sense without her in it, and that terrified him in a way that nothing in 12 years of violence had come close to replicating. He never found her. Now she was looking at him from 3 feet away, and the expression on her face was not relief. It was not joy. It was not even the complicated, layered thing he might have expected, the thing that contains multiple emotions fighting for space. It was fear, clean, unambiguous, directed at him. She took 1 step back. Her shoulder hit the doorframe of the SUV. Behind her, inside the vehicle, something was burning, a small electrical fire in the dashboard, smoke beginning to thicken. "Serena!" His voice came out wrong, quieter than he intended. "What are you—" "Don't!" Her voice hadn't changed. It was still low, still steady. The voice of a woman who had learned to keep her register flat, regardless of what was happening inside her. "Don't say my name. There's a fire in the car. You need to— I know about the fire." She wasn't moving. "Dante." She said his name like a decision, like she'd made a choice to use it and was aware of what the choice cost. "If you ever loved me—" Her voice broke on the word, just slightly, just enough that he caught it. "Stay away from me." Then the fuel line caught. The explosion wasn't catastrophic. The SUV had already been burning low, but the pressure wave was enough to knock them both sideways, and Marcus was already moving, pulling Dante back from the fireball. And when Dante got his bearings and turned back to the bridge, the rain was coming down harder than before, and Serena Ashcroft was gone. Not running, gone, as completely as she'd disappeared 12 years ago. Marcus said something. Dante didn't hear it. Oops. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the leather chair in his study on the 43rd floor and watched the city drain the darkness out toward morning, and he turned the moment over the way you turn something fragile, looking for the place it's most likely to break. Serena had been in that convoy. She'd been in the vehicle he'd been ordered, by his own intelligence, to intercept. She'd looked at him and told him to stay away, and her eyes had said something his mind kept refusing to process. She hadn't been surprised to see him. Rattled, yes, shaken, but not surprised. There was a difference, and in Dante's line of work, the difference mattered. He pulled out his phone at 4 a.m. and called a man named Crow, who handled his information needs with a discretion that bordered on the pathological. He gave Crow 2 things: Serena's face, reconstructed from memory with an accuracy that disturbed him when he thought too hard about why that accuracy existed, and the name she'd used when she'd been with him 12 years ago. "I need everything," Dante said. "Current identity, location history, employment, who she's been talking to." Crow said nothing for a moment. Then, "This personal? Find her." He hung up. Gideon Russ called at 7 a.m. Dante let it go to voicemail. Then listened to the message. Gideon expressing concern about the bridge operation, asking what had gone wrong, offering to convene a debrief. The voice was smooth and measured, as it always was. Gideon had been with the syndicate for 9 years, had climbed from logistics director to consigliere with a combination of genuine intelligence and what Dante had always read as loyalty. He was the second most powerful man in the organization. Dante had trusted him with things that could end him. Listening to the voicemail, Dante felt that nameless unease again. Heavier this time. He didn't call back. Crow delivered within 48 hours, which was fast even for him. The file was physical. Crow didn't trust digital transmission for anything that mattered, and Dante read it standing at his kitchen counter because he couldn't make himself sit down. Her name was Dr. Elise Renner. She'd held that identity for 11 years, built it from scratch, with a skill that suggested professional help at some point. The documentation was too clean to be amateur work. She was an emergency trauma surgeon at Mercy General on the Northwest Side. 11-hour shifts, 3 days a week. The kind of schedule that left no room for anything except the work. Her apartment was in Lincoln Square. She had no social media presence, no professional profile beyond the hospital's internal directory. No traceable memberships or affiliations. She had built a life designed to be invisible. Dante sat down. He read the file a second time, then a third. He was looking for the thing that would explain why she'd been in that convoy, why she'd been moving through the city in an armored vehicle at midnight, why she'd looked at him with that specific combination of fear and he kept stopping at this, kept turning it over, something that looked almost like relief, quickly smothered. He found a note at the bottom of the file, handwritten by Crow in his characteristically sparse style. 2 attempts on her life in the past 6 weeks. Different methods, no overlap in personnel. Professional. She knows she's being targeted. She's been moving residences every 8 to 10 days. Dante set the file down. He stood, walked to the window, looked at the city below him. Someone was trying to kill Serena Ashcroft. Someone had tried to kill her 6 weeks ago, and again after that, and the operation on the bridge, which Dante's own intelligence source had flagged as a Harrow Group weapons convoy, had been neither weapons nor Harrow Group. It had been a hit, dressed up to look like something else, funneled to Dante through a source he'd trusted for 6 years. He pulled out his phone and called Crow again. "Pritchard," Dante said when Crow picked up. "The customs broker. I need to know who's been talking to him." A pause. "That might take some... today." Another pause. "I'll see what I can do." Dante hung up and stood at the window for a long time. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did, grinding forward, indifferent, its million small lives colliding and separating and colliding again in the cold morning air. He hadn't seen Serena in 12 years. She'd told him to stay away. He pulled on his coat. He found her at 6:15 in the morning, leaving the hospital after a night shift. He knew the route she'd walk. Crow's file included her movement patterns, and he chose a position that would give her the option to run if she wanted to. He wasn't trying to corner her. He didn't know exactly what he was trying to do, which was itself unusual enough to register. She came around the corner with her head down and her bag over one shoulder, and she stopped when she saw him. She didn't reach for her phone or her keys. She just stopped, 4 feet away, and looked at him with that same flat, controlled expression. "I told you to stay away," she said. "Someone's been trying to kill you." He didn't move toward her. 2 attempts in 6 weeks. The convoy on the bridge was a 3rd attempt dressed up as a Harrow Group operation and fed to me as intelligence, so I'd intercept it and do their job for them. Something moved across her face. "You weren't supposed to be there personally." "I know, but I was." He held her gaze, which means either I was supposed to get killed in the process, or whoever set it up didn't know I'd show up myself. She was silent for a moment. "What do you want, Dante?" "To know why someone wants you dead." "That's not a good enough reason to involve yourself." "It's the only reason I need." He paused. He hadn't planned to say the next thing, but then he hadn't planned any of this. "You disappeared. 12 years, no word, nothing. I spent 6 months trying to find you. I need to understand that before I understand anything else." The control in her face cracked, just slightly, just at the corners. She looked away down the empty street, then back at him. "You can't understand it," she said. "Not yet." "Then help me." The silence stretched. A car moved through an intersection 2 blocks away. The morning sky was turning from black to a specific shade of gray-blue that meant the city was about to wake up. "There's a diner on Montrose," she said finally. "I'll give you an hour." She walked past him without touching him. He stood there for a moment, breathing, and then he followed. The diner was mostly empty at that hour. A man in a delivery uniform sat at the counter. A booth in the back was occupied by 2 women who had the look of nurses finishing a long shift. Serena chose a table in the middle, which Dante registered. She'd positioned herself where she could see all the exits, but where no one would mistake the meeting for intimate or private. She was thinking tactically. He sat across from her. A waitress brought coffee without being asked. Serena wrapped both hands around her mug. She wasn't looking at him. "I need to know what you know," she said. "About who set up the convoy." "I have someone working on it, but I need context first. What did you witness? When?" She looked up. 12 years ago, the night before I left." She said it plainly, without preamble, which he hadn't expected. I was at the Ashmore building. I'd come to surprise you. I knew you had a meeting there. I thought I could wait downstairs and we could have dinner after. She paused. I went to the wrong floor. I heard enough. Dante kept his expression still. What did you hear? Enough to know that what you did was worse than what I'd let myself believe. She met his eyes steadily. Enough that certain people would want to make sure I never had the opportunity to repeat it. Serena. The next morning, Gideon Rusk came to the apartment. The name landed between them. She watched his face when she said it. He told me you'd found out I'd overheard the meeting. He said you'd given the order. That if I stayed, I'd be dead by the end of the week. Her voice was perfectly flat. He told me it was a courtesy. That he was telling me because he'd always respected me and he thought I deserved the chance to run. Dante was very still. I ran, she said. I didn't say goodbye because I thought you'd have me followed. I didn't contact you because I thought any contact would get me killed. She lifted her coffee mug, set it down without drinking. It took me 3 years to stop looking over my shoulder every time I walked out my front door. The diner around them continued its morning routine, coffee refills, the distant sound of the kitchen, low conversation at the counter. None of it penetrated. I never ordered anything against you, Dante said. His voice was quiet and exact. Not an order, not a thought, not a... He stopped. He wasn't going to perform this. I never wanted anything to happen to you, then or now. I know that. She said it simply. He blinked. You know. I've had 12 years to think about it. She looked down at her hands. Gideon told me in April. I left in April. By the following February, I'd started to wonder. By February of the year after, I was reasonably certain he'd lied to me. She looked up. But I'd already built a lease renter by then. I had a job, a hospital, a life that wasn't connected to you or the syndicate or anything that could get someone killed. She paused. And I didn't know what I'd do if I went back and found out I was wrong about you, that I'd run from something that was never actually there. So you stayed away. I stayed away. The two of them sat in the early morning quiet of a Chicago diner, with that 12-year silence between them like a physical object, something that had taken up too much space for too long. There's something else, Serena said. Something in her voice changed. Not her tone, which was still controlled, but the quality underneath it. A weight that had been there since he'd first seen her on the bridge and that he'd been unable to name until this moment. I was pregnant when I left, she said. Dante didn't move. I found out 6 weeks after I disappeared. I was already in Kansas City by then, already most of the way through becoming someone else. She was looking at her hands. A boy. He lived for 9 days. The diner noise continued. The delivery man at the counter laughed at something on his phone. I named him James, Serena said. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Dante's hands were flat on the table. He was aware of this, aware of the effort it was taking to keep them still, to keep his breathing regular, to stay present in the booth, at the table in the diner, when every part of him wanted to be somewhere else. Somewhere he could exist in the shock of this without being observed. I'm sorry, he said. The words were inadequate and he knew it, and he said them anyway because there was nothing else. I know. She finally looked at him. Dante, someone is trying to kill me, and whoever it is, they've been at it for 6 weeks, and they're getting closer. The convoy on the bridge, I'd been moving every week and a half. I thought I'd shaken any surveillance, and they still found me. She leaned slightly forward. I think it's connected to what I heard at the Ashmore building. I think someone has known about me for a long time, and something changed recently, something that made keeping me quiet more urgent than it used to be. Gideon Rusk, Dante said. She nodded, once. He thought about the voicemail, the smooth, measured voice, the 9 years of trusted service. He thought about the name in Crow's note, Pritchard, the intelligence source who'd flagged the convoy as Harrow Group, and the call he'd placed that morning, and what he was increasingly certain Crow would find when he started pulling the thread. He thought about a woman on a bridge, telling him to stay away, and the expression under her eyes that he'd read correctly the first time and refused to believe. Not surprise. Recognition. She'd known who had sent the convoy. She'd been afraid that the man standing in front of her was part of it. And then she'd looked at his face and had a second private understanding that she hadn't been willing to trust. Not yet. Not after 12 years and a lie that had taken everything from her. "I have to make a call," he said. "Dante?" Her voice stopped him before he stood. "Whatever you're planning, whatever you're going to do, understand that I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm not asking you for anything." "I know. I'm telling you what I know because you asked, and because if Gideon Rusk is what I think he is, then you have a problem inside your own organization that's going to destroy you if you don't see it first." He looked at her across the table. This woman he had loved and lost and looked for and given up looking for, who had spent 12 years building a life designed to survive his world from the outside, who had buried a child and carried it alone and come out the other side still standing, still sharp, still looking at him with those eyes that had never once pretended to be less than they were. "I see it," he said. He stood, left enough cash on the table to cover the check 3 times over, and walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the glass. "Don't move residences again without telling me where you're going." She didn't answer. He pushed through the door into the Chicago morning, and behind him in the window reflection, he caught one last glimpse of her, sitting alone at the table, hands around her coffee, looking at nothing. Still breathing. Still here. For now. Crow called back at 9:47 in the morning. Dante was in the car, parked 2 blocks from the diner, engine running, watching the street in the side mirror out of habit more than necessity. He picked up on the first ring. "Pritchard's been dirty for 14 months, Crow said. No preamble, no softening. That was what Dante paid for. "He's been running parallel intelligence, feeding your operation legitimate product to maintain access, then feeding a secondary party selective information about your movements, convoy routes, personnel deployment, scheduling, the works." "Who's the secondary party?" A pause. The kind that meant Crow already knew the answer and was deciding how to say it. "The financial trail is thin, but it's there. The payments clear through a shell company registered in the Caymans. The company traces back to a holding group." Another pause. "The holding group is controlled by a law firm that handles estate work for a trust. The trust was established 9 years ago in the name of a woman named Celeste Varon." Dante said nothing. "Celeste Varon is Gideon Rusk's mother's maiden name," Crow said. "She's been dead for 22 years. Someone used her identity to build the structure." Dante's hand tightened around the phone. "That's not all," Crow said. "Say it." "The shell company has made payments to 3 other recipients in the past 18 months. One of them is a federal agent named Haas, Paul Haas, Organized Crime Task Force, Chicago Field Office. He's been on your case file for 6 years. The other 2 are foreign nationals with documented ties to an international brokerage operation out of Rotterdam." Crow's voice stayed flat and factual. "The brokerage handles weapons, intelligence, and financial services for criminal organizations looking to formalize. They've been expanding into North American markets." "They want the syndicate's infrastructure," Dante said. "They want your distribution network, your political contacts, and your money channels. The syndicate itself is almost incidental." A brief pause. "Gideon Rusk has been positioning himself as the transition executive, the man who delivers the organization from within." Dante sat with that for a moment. 9 years. The man had been inside his organization for 9 years, had climbed to the position of consigliere, had sat across from Dante at 100 tables and looked him in the eye and given him counsel, and for at least 14 months, and probably longer, had been disassembling everything Dante had built and preparing to sell the pieces to strangers in Rotterdam. "The woman," Dante said. "Serena Ashcroft. Why her specifically?" "I'm still working that part, but I can tell you that the assassination attempts on her started 3 weeks after a medical records audit at Mercy General. Something got flagged in the hospital's system. I don't have the specifics yet. Whatever it was, someone noticed and moved fast." "Find out what got flagged." "Already on it." Dante hung up. He sat in the car and looked at the street and let the information settle into the architecture of his thinking, the way it always did when the shape of something became clear. Not comfortable, not manageable, just clear. The clarity was almost physical. He'd spent 12 years building the Valen Syndicate into a machine that ran without friction, and the man he'd trusted most had spent nearly that entire time learning how it worked so he could take it apart. He thought about the voicemail, the smooth, measured voice. He pulled away from the curb and drove north. Gideon Rusk operated from an office suite in the Meridian Tower, which was exactly the kind of location a man in his position would choose. Legitimate address, corporate ambiance, the ability to receive visitors without anyone looking twice. Dante had approved the arrangement himself 4 years ago because it had seemed efficient. He didn't call ahead. Gideon's assistant, a young man named Peter, who had the specific anxiety of someone who understood he worked adjacent to dangerous things without fully understanding how dangerous, stood up too fast when Dante came through the glass door. "Mr. Vallon, I don't have you on the—" "Is he in?" It wasn't a question. Peter sat back down. Gideon was on the phone when Dante opened the inner office door. He was standing by the window with his back to the room. A tall man, well-dressed, silver at his temples in a way that he'd always worn as a kind of authority. He turned when he heard the door, and his face did something that Dante clocked and filed away. Not surprise. A very fast adjustment from one expression to another, executed well, but not perfectly. "I'll call you back," Gideon said into the phone, and ended the call. He set the phone on his desk. "Dante, I was starting to wonder if you'd gotten my message." "I got it. You didn't call back." "No." Dante moved into the room and sat in the chair across from Gideon's desk, which put him lower than where Gideon was standing, the subservient position, the visitor's position, and he sat in it deliberately because it would be read as ease, and ease would be read as ignorance. "Sit down, Gideon." Gideon sat. "Tell me about the bridge," Dante said. "That's what I've been trying to—" "Not the debrief. Tell me what you know about who was actually in that convoy." A beat. Gideon's expression stayed cooperative, concerned, slightly puzzled. The face of a loyal second-in-command confronted with an unusual question. It was a good performance. Dante had watched the man perform for 9 years and had thought he was watching authenticity. "Our intelligence said it was Harrow Group." "I know what the intelligence said. Pritchard fed us the cover. I'm asking what you know about what was actually in the vehicle." "Dante." Gideon leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. "You're not saying you think I had something to do with—" "I'm not saying anything yet. I asked a question." The silence in the room was the specific silence of two men who understand each other at a level the conversation hasn't reached yet. Gideon was good at silence. He'd always been good at it, could fill it with suggestion without saying a word. It was one of the qualities Dante had valued. "There was a woman in that convoy," Dante said, "a trauma surgeon who's been running under a constructed identity for 11 years. Someone has been trying to kill her for 6 weeks. The attempts were professional, different personnel, no overlap, no obvious pattern." He watched Gideon's face. "The convoy was the 3rd attempt, dressed up as a rival operation and fed to me through Pritchard, so I'd do the work." He paused. "Which means someone either expected me not to show up personally, or they wanted me dead too and didn't particularly care which of us went down on that bridge." Gideon said nothing. "You called me the next morning," Dante said, "before I'd told anyone I'd been at the bridge personally. The operation was run by my team. The only people who knew I was there were Marcus and the men I brought." He let that sit. "You asked what went wrong." Something changed in Gideon's eyes. Not fear, or not only fear, something harder, a kind of recalibration. "You're making an accusation," Gideon said. "I'm describing facts. Facts you've constructed from—" "Pritchard," Dante said. 14 months of parallel intelligence. Shell company out of the Caymans. Celeste Varon." He watched the name land. "Your mother's maiden name, Gideon. You built the structure in a dead woman's name. That's either sentimental or sloppy, and you're neither." The cooperative expression was gone. What replaced it was something Dante had never seen on Gideon's face, or had seen and misread for 9 years. A kind of tired, cold precision. The face of a man who has been managing a long performance and has just received word that the curtain has come down. "How long have you known?" Gideon asked. "Since this morning." "Then you're ahead of where I thought you'd be." He said it without embarrassment. "I'll give you that." "Tell me about the woman." Gideon looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached across his desk, opened a drawer, and set a glass on the surface. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon from a bottle Dante had given him for his birthday 3 years ago, and he drank it in one movement and set the glass down. She was supposed to be handled 11 years ago, Gideon said. When she ran, I let it go. She was gone. She had no infrastructure, no allies. She was a civilian who'd heard half a conversation and disappeared. The risk calculus said she wasn't worth the exposure of going after her. You told her I'd ordered her execution. A pause. Yes. To make her run. To make her run and stay gone. He said it flatly, as if the logic were self-evident. She was in your life, Dante. She was the only person you'd ever let in who wasn't part of the operation. That was a liability for you and a complication for me. 2 problems, 1 solution. Dante's hands were still on the arms of the chair. She was pregnant, he said. Something moved across Gideon's face. Not guilt. Dante had stopped expecting guilt. Something more like impatience with information that wasn't operationally relevant. I didn't know that, Gideon said. The child died. I'm sorry to hear it. The words were correct and completely empty. Dante breathed through the rage that rose in his chest. Not the hot rage of the young, but the cold, compressed kind that settles in your sternum and waits. What changed? Dante asked. 6 weeks ago. What changed that made her worth going after again? Gideon refilled his glass. He wasn't performing composure now. He'd moved past the need for it. He was simply thinking. The audit at Mercy General, Gideon said. She's been treating patients for 11 years. Emergency trauma, which means high volume, high variety. A lot of people pass through her hands in conditions that make them vulnerable. He set the bottle down. 3 of the patients she treated in the past 24 months are connected to the financial network we've been building with the Rotterdam Group. One of them was brought in after a vehicle accident 18 months ago. Unconscious, no identification. She treated him, stabilized him, standard procedure. He was carrying something, Dante said. He was carrying a biometric chip, subdermal, new generation, the kind that contains encrypted identification markers. It's how the Rotterdam Group manages identity verification for its highest tier members. Gideon's voice was matter-of-fact. When he was admitted unconscious, the intake scan flagged an anomalous reading. She noted it in the medical record because she's thorough. Clinical notation, no understanding of what it was, but it's there in the record with enough specificity that someone who knows what to look for can identify the man, match the markers to the network's registry, and start pulling threads. She documented evidence that can identify the network's members, Dante said. Without knowing that's what she was doing, yes. Gideon looked at him. The medical record is encrypted in the hospital system, but the audit 3 weeks ago was part of a data migration. The encryption lapsed briefly, it was flagged, and the flag was noticed by someone who checks for that kind of thing. Haas, Dante said. Paul Haas. A pause. You've been busy this morning. Is Haas working for you or for Rotterdam? For the moment, for both. Gideon said it without particular concern. The arrangement is temporary. Once the transition is complete, the federal component becomes unnecessary. The transition, Dante said. You handing my organization to Rotterdam. Gideon met his eyes. Your organization has been running for 15 years on a model that's becoming obsolete. The political connections you've cultivated are aging out. The distribution infrastructure requires updating, and the risk profile of operating as an independent syndicate in the current regulatory environment is stop. Dante stood. Gideon stopped. You sold us, Dante said. That's what happened. Everything else is a story you've been telling yourself. Gideon set down his glass. He stood too, and for a moment the two of them faced each other across a mahogany desk in a corporate office suite on the 43rd floor. And what was between them was 9 years of the most complete betrayal Dante had ever personally experienced, which was a significant distinction, given the world he'd inhabited. What are you going to do? Gideon asked. Not nervously, almost curiously. Right now, I'm going to walk out of this office, Dante said, and then I'm going to spend however much time it takes to take apart everything you've built. Dante. Gideon's voice was level. You're one man with 8 remaining loyal soldiers and a woman you can't protect. I have a federal task force, a Rotterdam logistics team, and 14 months of preparation. He paused. I'm not the liability in this equation. Dante buttoned his jacket. He moved toward the door. You had me in this chair on purpose, he said without turning. Lower than you. Visitor's position. He stopped with his hand on the door frame. I sat in it on purpose, because I needed you comfortable enough to answer my questions honestly. He looked back. You answered every one of them. He walked out. Marcus was waiting in the lobby. Marcus Vey was 41 years old, built like he'd been constructed for a specific industrial purpose, and had been next to Dante since Dante was 27, which was longer than most of the other relationships in Dante's life, including the ones that were supposed to matter more. He read the look on Dante's face in the first second and fell into step beside him without a word. They were in the car before Dante spoke. Gideon. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. Then, how bad? Rotterdam, federal inside man, 14 months minimum. Dante looked out the window at the street. He confirmed it himself. Marcus made a sound that was not quite profanity and not quite prayer, something between them. He confirmed it. He didn't see a reason not to. He thinks he's already won. Has he? Dante didn't answer immediately. Outside the window, the city was doing its midday thing. Lunch crowds, delivery trucks, the ordinary machinery of a place that didn't know what was happening in its own machinery. He thought about the 14 months, the architecture Gideon had described, the shell companies, the federal partnership, the Rotterdam integration, the systematic positioning of himself as the transition point. 14 months of preparation meant Gideon had contingencies. He'd anticipated this moment, or a moment like it. He's got the money locked, Dante said, and he's got Haas. Haas can move against us legally the moment Gideon gives the signal, freeze assets, execute warrants, put enough of our people in federal custody that we can't mount a coordinated response. He turned from the window. He's going to wait until he thinks I'm trying to rebuild. Move when I'm stretched. So we move first. We need Serena moved before anything else. If Gideon gets to her... Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face changed. What? Dante said. It's Reyes. Eddie Reyes was one of Dante's 8 remaining loyal captains, young, skilled, someone Dante had been grooming for 3 years. He's been sitting on the Lincoln Square apartment, the one Crow tracked to Dr. Renner. She's not there. She knows they know the location. No. Marcus's voice had gone flat. She went back. 20 minutes ago. Dante was already reaching for his own phone. Why the hell would she... There's someone else there, Marcus said. Reyes made a woman going in 20 minutes before Serena. Didn't match any of the surveillance photos. He thought she was a neighbor. He paused. He just ran her face. She's Haas's partner, Special Agent Donna Voss. Dante dialed Serena's number. It rang 4 times. Then a voice that was not Serena's said, Dr. Renner isn't available right now, Mr. Vallon. The voice was female, professional, completely steady. Put her on, Dante said. She's fine. Currently. A brief pause. We need to talk about the medical record, the one from the Mercy General intake, 18 months ago. Dr. Renner annotated an unusual biometric reading on an unconscious patient. We need that record corrected, or more specifically, we need the annotation removed and the original scan data deleted from the hospital's archive. Another pause. Dr. Renner has been reluctant to cooperate without some assurance about her continued safety. We thought perhaps you might help facilitate. Dante kept his voice level. You're a federal agent threatening a civilian. I'm a federal agent managing an ongoing investigation, Voss said. The distinction matters legally. Tell me you understand the distinction. Tell me what you want from me. Your cooperation on a transition of organizational assets effective immediately. Gideon Rusk has already outlined the parameters. We need your formal acknowledgement that you're stepping back from operational control. Her voice was brisk and clean. In exchange, Dr. Renner walks out of her apartment unharmed, and we close the file on the assassination attempts. Clean slate. Dante was already out of the car. I need an hour, he said. You have 20 minutes. He started walking. Marcus was beside him before he'd gone 10 feet. already on his radio calling Reyes. 20 minutes. The Lincoln Square apartment was 8 blocks north. He walked fast, not running. Running was panic, and panic was the thing that got you killed when everything else had already gone wrong. He walked fast and he thought about Gideon's voice in the office and the confidence underneath it, the kind of confidence that came from having anticipated this specific sequence of events. And he thought about Voss's voice on the phone and the word cooperation, which in his experience never meant what it sounded like. He thought about Serena going back to the apartment, which meant she'd gone back for something specific, something she needed badly enough to risk returning to a location she knew was compromised. He thought about the medical record Voss had described, the biometric annotation, and the fact that Serena was the most careful person he'd known in his adult life, and careful people didn't return to dangerous locations without a reason. She knew what she had. She'd known for longer than 6 weeks. She'd gone back to the apartment for the record itself, a copy, a backup, something she'd kept because she was a doctor, and doctors documented things, and 12 years of building. Elise Renner had included building the instinct to keep evidence of anomalies because, in emergency medicine, an unexplained anomaly was always the thing that saved a life or ended one. He turned the corner onto her block, and there was Reyes, 23 years old, leather jacket, pretending to look at his phone, who glanced up and fell into step beside him without breaking stride. "One agent inside," Reyes said quietly. "Voss. Came in through the back stairs. She's got a sidearm and a second agent positioned on the fire escape. Male, 40s. I make him as carrying something heavier than a sidearm under his coat." "Serena?" "She was cooperative when she went in. No signs of physical distress from what I could see through the window. Voss has her at the kitchen table." "How do we get the agent on the fire escape?" "I can handle that." Marcus didn't phrase it as a question. Dante stopped at the building's front entrance. He looked at the intercom panel. Serena's unit was 4C. He pressed the button. Silence for a moment. Then Voss's voice, tinny, through the speaker. "Mr. Vallon, you still have 16 minutes. "Buzz me in," he said. "I'm coming up, alone." A pause. The lock clicked. He went through the door. The stairwell smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking, garlic, onion, something that belonged to an ordinary Tuesday in an ordinary apartment building that had nothing to do with any of this. He climbed 3 flights at the same pace he'd walked the last 8 blocks, steady, deliberate, saving the adrenaline for the moment it would actually be useful. He knocked on 4C. Voss opened the door. She was younger than he'd expected, early 30s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of lean efficiency in her posture that came from years of field work. She was holding her weapon at her side, not pointed at him, which was either professional courtesy or a calculation about optics. "You came alone," she said. "I said I would." She stepped back to let him in. The apartment was small, one main room with a kitchen along one wall and a table in the center, a hallway leading back toward what would be a bedroom and bathroom. Serena was at the table, as Reyes had said. She was sitting with her hands flat on the surface and her back straight, and her expression doing that thing, the controlled, flat stillness. And she looked at Dante when he came in, and something passed between them that didn't require words, and that Voss, watching them both, probably noted and misread. "Sit down," Voss said to Dante. He sat. "Where's the record?" Voss said. She was looking at Serena. "You came back here for something. You had 11 years to build this identity, and you walked back into a compromised location, which means whatever you came back for was worth that risk." She pulled out the chair across from Serena and sat in it. "So, where is it?" Serena looked at her. "I don't know what record you're referring to." "The biometric annotation. Mercy General, 18 months ago, patient John Doe admitted at 2:14 a.m. from a vehicle accident on... I treat an average of 12 to 18 critical patients per shift," Serena said. "I don't have specific recall of every notation I've made in the past 18 months. "Dr. Renner." "That's not my name." Voss blinked. It was the first time Dante had seen her lose the rhythm of the conversation. Serena had said it completely without heat, not as a correction, not as defiance, just as a plain statement of fact that happened to destabilize the premise of everything else. "My name is Serena Ashcroft," Serena said. "I've been living under a constructed identity for 11 years because a man named Gideon Rusk, told me I was going to be killed if I didn't disappear, and that turned out to be a lie designed to remove me from a situation that was inconvenient for him. She looked at Voss with the steady patience of someone who had prepared for this conversation. I'm also aware that Paul Haas, your supervisor, has been receiving payments from a shell company controlled by that same man, which means I'm not sure what cooperation with you actually means right now, or what assurance you're in a position to offer me. The silence in the room was different from the silence in Gideon's office. Dante watched Voss's face. How do you know about Haas? Voss said. I've known about Haas for 8 months, Serena said, because one of his contacts came through my ER 6 months before the audit, and he was carrying identification that I recognized as fabricated because I've spent 11 years looking at fabricated identification, and I documented what I found. She paused. Not just in the hospital system, in a format that's been sitting outside any network Haas or Gideon Rusk can reach. Dante kept his face still. She'd built a dead man's switch. Alone, in an apartment in Lincoln Square, working from her medical records and 11 years of careful observation, Serena Ashcroft had constructed something that could bring down the entire network, and she'd positioned it somewhere that made killing her the single most counterproductive thing anyone in that network could do. Voss understood it at the same moment. The weapon at her side didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. A rapid reassessment, a restructuring of the calculation she'd walked into the apartment with. What do you want? Voss said. I want to know whose side you're actually on, Serena said. Another silence. Then the window at the back of the apartment, the one that opened onto the fire escape, shattered inward. Not the agent Marcus had been handling. Someone else. Dante was already moving when the second figure came through, and the gun in his hand was pointed not at Serena but at Voss, which meant this wasn't Rotterdam cleanup. This was Gideon's direct action, and Gideon had decided that waiting for Dante to step back from operational control was taking too long. The man who'd come through the window was professional and fast, and he fired once before Dante reached him, and the shot went into the wall 6 inches from Voss's shoulder because Dante had hit his arm at exactly the right moment. And then they were fighting in the small kitchen of a Lincoln Square apartment with a table between them and Serena on her feet, and Voss raising her weapon, and the whole thing compressing into the kind of seconds that expand when you're inside them. Marcus came through the front door 30 seconds later. It felt like 30 years. When it was over, the window was destroyed and a man Dante didn't recognize was zip-tied to the kitchen radiator, and Voss was standing against the wall with her weapon in a two-hand grip that had nowhere obvious to point it anymore, breathing hard for the first time since Dante had met her. Serena was at the kitchen counter with a dish towel pressed against a cut on her forearm, a graze from the broken window glass, not deep, the kind of wound that looks worse than it is, but that she was treating with the automatic competence of someone who had been treating wounds for a decade. That was Gideon's man, Dante said to Voss. Voss lowered her weapon. She looked at the man zip-tied to the radiator, then at the shattered window, then at Dante. Haas authorized this operation, she said. It came out slightly differently than anything she'd said before. Less statement, more the sound of someone hearing an explanation click into place against a background of months of unease. He told me it was an asset recovery, standard. Haas is Gideon's inside line, Dante said. Everything you've been running through the task force, warrants, surveillance, the asset freeze request that's been sitting in federal processing for the past 6 weeks, Gideon has been directing it. You've been working for him. Voss stood very still. Not anymore, she said. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Serena, who was tying off the dish towel with neat, economical movements, and watching him with the expression that meant she was thinking 3 moves ahead. We need to move, Dante said. Gideon knows this location failed. He's going to escalate. I have a secure location, Voss said. One that Haas doesn't know about? A pause. Yes. Then we use it. He looked at Marcus. Get Reyes in here. And call the others. Whatever's left, I want them moving now. He looked at Serena. You're going with Voss. Serena looked at him. And you? I'm going to the Syndicate's Financial Operations Center before Gideon gets there first and locks me out of my own accounts. Dante. Her voice held the particular weight of someone who had already calculated the risk he hadn't finished calculating yet. If Gideon anticipated you confronting him this morning, he's already moved on the accounts. Dante took out his phone and called his financial operations director. The call connected and he waited, and in the 3 seconds before the man on the other end spoke, he already knew what he was going to hear. The specific silence of someone about to deliver news they don't want to deliver. Mr. Vallon. The voice was tense and careful. The primary accounts were frozen 40 minutes ago. Federal order, secondary reserves, the offshore structure. I'm showing access attempts from an internal credential. Someone inside tried to initiate a transfer sequence 10 minutes ago. I blocked it, but they're going to come back with the right authorization codes, and I can't. Who initiated the transfer? The credential belongs to your Deputy Director of Finance, a man named Stop the transfer, lock everything down, all accounts, accept no instructions from anyone except me directly, in person. Dante's voice was flat. Do it now and don't use the internal network to communicate anything from this point forward. He hung up 40 minutes ago. Gideon had moved on the accounts 40 minutes ago, before Dante had even left the Meridian Tower, which meant the conversation in that office had not been Gideon's overconfidence. It had been a delay. Gideon had sat across from him and answered every question, had let the betrayal land, had watched Dante absorb the information and stand up and walk out, and had used every minute of that conversation to buy time for everything else to fall into place. Dante stood in the ruined kitchen of a Lincoln Square apartment with a federal agent reconsidering her allegiances and a woman who had survived 12 years of his world by staying invisible and 8 loyal soldiers and a financial operation that was hemorrhaging faster than he could stop it. And he understood with complete clarity that Gideon had not miscalculated in letting him walk out of that office. Gideon had simply decided that letting Dante run was more efficient than catching him. A man with no money, no infrastructure, and no time was not a threat. He was a target. Dante made 3 calls in the car, on the way to the Financial Operations Center, and all 3 went to voicemail. That was the first sign. His Deputy Director of Finance, voicemail. His Head of Security Operations, voicemail. Eddie Reyes, who had been standing 30 feet away 6 minutes ago, voicemail. Marcus was driving. He glanced over once, read whatever was on Dante's face, and pressed harder on the accelerator without being asked. Try Kellerman, Dante said. Kellerman was his oldest captain, 54, gray-haired, the kind of man who answered his phone because he came from a generation that understood a missed call as a statement. Marcus dialed through the car's system, 4 rings, then, Mr. Vallon? The voice was careful in a way that Kellerman's voice was not usually careful. Where are you? Dante said. A pause that was half a second too long. My office, north side. Reyes isn't answering. Another pause. I wouldn't know about that. Dante looked at Marcus. Marcus's jaw was set. Kellerman, Dante said, whatever Gideon offered you, I'm going to stop you there. The carefulness in his voice had resolved into something simpler and harder. This isn't about what anyone offered me. This is about arithmetic. You've got 8 men, no money, and a federal warrant that's going to drop inside the next 2 hours. Gideon's got 40, the accounts, and a signed cooperation agreement with a task force. A breath on the line. I've got a daughter in college and a wife with medical bills. I'm sorry, Dante. The arithmetic doesn't work in your favor. The call ended. Dante sat with the dead phone for a moment. 8 men. Now he was thinking about what 8 men actually meant, not abstractly, but practically, in terms of what could be done and defended and held. The Financial Operations Center was in a building in the West Loop with 12 employees who reported to him directly, 2 security guards who were on the syndicate's payroll, and a server room that contained the only remaining lever he had over the offshore financial structure. If Gideon moved on the building before he got there. Faster, he said. Marcus was already running a red light. They were 4 blocks out when the explosion happened. Not at the operations center, Dante's mind went there first, the catastrophizing that his training had never fully eliminated. But the sound came from the wrong direction, from somewhere east and below. And Marcus hit the brakes instinctively, and they both sat in the car looking at the column of smoke rising from somewhere near the river. Dante's phone rang. Unknown number. He picked up. That was your underground vault, The voice was Gideon's, calm, conversational, the voice of a man discussing something mildly interesting. The one beneath the Caldwell building that I've known about for 4 years and never mentioned because I was waiting until I needed the information to matter. A pause. It mattered today. Dante said nothing. The vault contained your physical reserve, approximately 14 million in mixed currency and negotiables, plus the ledgers for the offshore secondary structure. Another pause. The ledgers are gone. The currency is gone. The building has a gas leak, according to the fire department, which is currently responding. A pause. I want you to understand that I'm not doing this out of anger. I need you to understand that. This is operational, not personal. You told Serena I ordered her execution, Dante said. You let her disappear. You let her deliver a child alone and bury him alone and spend 11 years looking over her shoulder for something that never existed. His voice was flat. Don't tell me this isn't personal. The silence on the line was different from Gideon's previous silences. Thinner. Stand down, Gideon said. Walk away from the operations center. I know that's where you're headed. Walk away, contact your lawyer, and begin cooperation discussions with the task force. You still have a usable future on the other side of this if you stop now. Who are the Rotterdam people? Dante said. Specifically, names. A pause. That's not a question I'm going to answer. Then we don't have anything else to say. He ended the call. Marcus looked at him. The operations center is already compromised, Dante said. He was thinking fast, stripping out everything that no longer applied and working with what remained. No vault, no primary accounts, no secondary ledger. Kellerman was gone, and if Kellerman had turned, he needed to assume that the other 7 remaining loyal soldiers were now reduced to 5 at best. Reyes, still not answering. The man had been standing outside the Lincoln Square building 6 minutes before Dante left. In 6 minutes, something had happened to Eddie Reyes. Stop the car, Dante said. Marcus pulled over. Dante got out. He stood on the sidewalk in the West Loop with the smell of someone else's Wednesday morning around him, and looked at the smoke column against the gray sky and thought about the shape of what Gideon had built. 14 months minimum, probably longer, layers inside layers, and at the center of it something that Crow had flagged and that Dante had absorbed as information without yet understanding as architecture. The Rotterdam group wanted the syndicate's infrastructure, the distribution network, the political contacts, the money channels. Gideon was the transition executive, but a transition executive needed something to transition, needed an organization that still functioned at the moment of transfer, not a burned shell. Which meant Gideon was not trying to destroy the syndicate. He was trying to incapacitate Dante specifically while keeping everything else running. Remove the head, keep the body breathing, which meant there was something Gideon still needed from him. He got back in the car. Take me to Crow. Crow operated from a photography studio in Pilsen that he'd owned for 11 years and used perhaps 4 times for actual photography. The studio was a cover that had outlived its necessity and become a kind of institutional habit. Crow kept it because changing locations introduced variables, and Crow's relationship with variables was fundamentally hostile. He buzzed them in without using the intercom, which meant he'd seen them on his exterior cameras, which meant he was watching his exterior cameras, which meant he was already aware that something had changed in the operational landscape. He was sitting at his workstation when they came in. 3 monitors, multiple open feeds, the smell of very old coffee. He was a small man, 60s, with the kind of stillness that in another life might have made him a surgeon. He looked at Dante once and then back at his screens. Vault's gone, he said. I know. Kellerman's been in contact with Gideon's people since yesterday morning. Not today, yesterday. He tapped one of the screens without looking away from it. I was going to call you this afternoon. I wanted to be certain first. You should have called this morning. Yes. No apology. Crow didn't do apologies. He did accuracy and delivery schedules. Reyes is in federal custody. Haas's team picked him up outside the Lincoln Square building 8 minutes after you left. They're holding him on a weapons charge. Planted by the look of the timing, but it'll hold long enough to keep him out of play. Dante absorbed this. The medical record, he said. Serena's annotation. You said you were working on understanding the scope of it. What did you find? Crow turned from the screens for the first time. He looked at Dante with the expression he used when information was going to require more than one sentence. Sit down, he said. Dante sat. The patient Serena treated 18 months ago was a man named Arend Voss. No relation to the federal agent, just a coincidence of surnames. Arend Voss is the Rotterdam Group's chief financial architect. He structured every money laundering channel the group operates through North American criminal organizations, including yours. Crow paused. When he was admitted to Mercy General unconscious, the intake scan read his biometric chip and logged it as an anomalous subdermal reading. Serena documented it thoroughly: dimensions, location, signal frequency, everything she could observe clinically. She had no idea what it was. She thought it might be a pacemaker component that had migrated. But the documentation is specific enough to identify him, Dante said. More than that. Crow turned back to his screens. Arend Voss has been operating under 6 different identities across 3 continents for the past 12 years. The biometric chip is how the Rotterdam Group tracks its own people internally. It's the only form of identification that can't be forged or transferred. The data in the chip contains Voss's true identity, his account access codes, and, this is the part that matters, the decryption key for the group's entire financial ledger. The room was very quiet. The annotation in Serena's medical record, Dante said slowly, contains enough data to reconstruct the chip's signal. A forensic biometrics specialist could use the clinical documentation to reverse engineer the chip's output and extract the account data. Crow nodded. I've spoken to 2 such specialists in the past 18 hours. It's possible. It would take time and the right equipment, but it is possible. Which means Serena's medical record is effectively a key to Rotterdam's entire financial operation, Dante said. Yes. Which means Gideon isn't just trying to protect his own arrangement with Rotterdam, he's trying to protect Rotterdam itself. Dante was working through it as he said it. If that record surfaces and someone uses it to access the ledger, every corrupt politician, every law enforcement contact, every criminal organization that Rotterdam has financed or laundered for across North America and Europe, Crow said. Every identity, every transaction, every account. It would be the largest single dismantlement of a criminal financial network in the last 20 years. And Serena has been carrying that, Dante said, for 18 months, without knowing what it was. Crow looked at him. She knows now, or she's worked it out. She went back to that apartment for her backup copy of the record, and she's a thorough woman. I suspect she's been building toward this moment for longer than we have. Dante's phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize, 3 words and an address. Come alone. Now. He showed it to Marcus. Marcus shook his head. He showed it to Crow. Crow looked at it for a moment. That address is a warehouse in Bridgeport, Crow said, registered to a freight company that dissolved 8 years ago. The building has been vacant since. He paused. It's also where your Captain Brennan has been operating a secondary stash site for the past 3 years. Brennan. Thomas Brennan was one of the 8, now 6, remaining men Dante had believed were still his. Brennan was 37, methodical, had run the syndicate's North Corridor for 5 years. He was not a man who sent cryptic text messages. Dante stood. Dante, Marcus said, someone's using Brennan's location to bring me in. He was already moving. Which means either Brennan sent that message under duress, or someone else knows about the location and used it because they knew I'd recognize it. He stopped. Or Brennan is the someone else. He looked at Crow. The men I still think are mine. Cross-reference every one of them against Gideon's financial trails, whatever you can access. I need to know who else has turned before I walk into anything else today. That'll take 6 hours. I need it in 2. He was out the door before Crow could respond. Oh. The warehouse in Bridgeport smelled like rust and standing water and the particular damp of a building that has been sealed too long. Dante went in through the east entrance, alone, because the text had said alone, and because bringing Marcus would only tell whoever was inside that he hadn't read the text as serious. And whatever this was, it was serious. He moved through the ground floor in the dark, with one hand on the wall, and his other hand carrying the weight of a gun he'd taken from the man zip-tied to Serena's radiator. He could hear water dripping somewhere. The building had 6,000 square feet of floor space on 2 levels, and the secondary stash site, according to what he knew of Brennan's operational habits, would be in the northeast corner of the upper level. He found Brennan at the top of the stairs. Thomas Brennan was sitting on the floor with his back against a support column and his hands visible and empty and a phone balanced on his knee. His face in the dim light from the high windows was the face of a man who had made a decision and was waiting to find out if the decision had been the right one. He wasn't alone. Standing against the wall 10 feet away was a woman Dante had never seen, late 40s, expensive coat, the posture of someone accustomed to rooms where she was the most consequential person present. She was watching Dante with the quality of attention that assessments require. "Mr. Vallon," she said. "Who are you?" "My name is Claire Soto." She said it without ceremony. "I'm the deputy director of the FBI's Organized Crime Division, not the field office, the division. I report directly to the director's office in Washington." She paused. "I've been running a parallel investigation into the Rotterdam Group's North American operations for 19 months. 19 months, Mr. Vallon, which is 5 months longer than Gideon Rusk has been selling your organization to them." Dante looked at Brennan. "You brought her here." Brennan met his eyes. "I've been working with her for 7 months. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. There wasn't a way to tell you that didn't—" He stopped. "There wasn't a clean way." 7 months. Dante stood with that. The specific weight of another betrayal, another member of his organization operating without his knowledge, another layer of architecture he'd been standing on without knowing what it was made of. "Why now?" he said to Soto. "Because Haas moved today, which means Gideon is accelerating his timeline, which means we have less time than we thought." She stepped away from the wall. "And because the woman, Dr. Ashcroft, has the medical record, and if Gideon reaches her before we do, that record disappears and we lose the only external evidence that can unlock the Rotterdam ledger. You know about the record. I've known about the record for 4 months. I've known about Dr. Ashcroft for 3. Her voice was direct, without apology. "I didn't move on it because moving prematurely would have collapsed the investigation. I needed Gideon to execute the transition before I could arrest the Rotterdam principals. I needed them on American soil or in communication with American assets in a way that gave me jurisdiction." "You needed him to finish what he was doing," Dante said. "Yes." "While he was trying to kill Serena." Soto held his gaze. "We had Dr. Ashcroft under surveillance from a distance. We believed the risk was manageable. She survived 3 assassination attempts. She survived 3 assassination attempts. The acknowledgement was flat and factual. The calculation was wrong. I'm telling you that directly because I need you to understand that I'm being honest with you about the failure, not because I expect it to change what you think of me." Dante looked at Brennan for a moment. Brennan looked back at him with the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for too long and has just set it down and doesn't yet know how his back feels about the change. "What do you want from me?" Dante said. 3 things, Soto said. "First, Dr. Ashcroft's location, so I can put a team around her that Haas can't reach. My people, not his. Second, your cooperation in documenting the transition arrangements Gideon made with Rotterdam, specifically the financial architecture, which you know better than anyone alive because you built it." She paused. "Third, the offshore secondary ledger. The ledger is gone. The vault is not where you kept the real ledger." Soto said it quietly. "The physical ledger in the vault was a decoy. The actual secondary financial records are in a digital format distributed across 3 encrypted servers, and access requires your biometric confirmation." She looked at him steadily. "Crow told me that 4 months ago." The silence in the warehouse was the particular silence of a man discovering the exact shape of his isolation. Crow. 4 months ago. Dante thought about Crow's stillness, about the old coffee, about the careful precision of every piece of information Crow had delivered and the specific things Crow had not delivered until asked. Kellerman's contact with Gideon being yesterday, not today. Brennan's parallel communication with federal authorities. The things Crow had assembled into a picture and held back from Dante while holding them forward for Soto. Crow had not betrayed him. That was important to be precise about. Crow had been serving two parallel interests simultaneously, and the interests had not been in direct conflict until today. But Dante had paid Crow for absolute discretion, and Crow had built a side arrangement with federal authorities and hadn't mentioned it. Everyone in his world had built a side arrangement. He understood, standing in the cold warehouse in Bridgeport, that the thing he'd been building for 15 years was not an empire. It had never been an empire. It had been a collection of individual calculations, people making assessments about where the weight would fall and positioning themselves accordingly. Kellerman had been making the calculation. Brennan had been making it. Crow had been making it. Gideon had been making it for 9 years with exceptional foresight and exceptional patience. The difference was what you did with the calculation, what you decided it was for. Voss, he said. Dana Voss, the federal agent at the Lincoln Square apartment. She came in as Ha's partner and changed direction when she understood the situation. He looked at Soto. Is she actually yours? Something moved in Soto's expression, the first thing that looked involuntary. Dana Voss has been working with my office for 11 months. She got into Ha's unit intentionally, on my instruction, to build documentation of his arrangements with the syndicate. She paused. She's been working two directions simultaneously, and the personal cost of that has been considerable. She's solid. Then she's with Serena right now. Yes. So Serena is at... He stopped. The location of Voss's safe house was information he'd received from Voss herself. In the apartment, in front of a man who was now zip-tied to a radiator and who, before Dante had left, had been conscious and listening. He thought about the timing, how long it would take Gideon to reach the man on the radiator, how long to extract what the man had heard. We need to move Serena again, he said. Now. Immediately. He was already calling Voss's number when the call came in from a number he didn't know. He stopped. Two phones ringing simultaneously, his own outgoing call and an incoming call on the second number. He answered the incoming call. The voice was Gideon's. She's not at the safe house anymore, Gideon said. She's with me. Dante did not move. The man at the radiator, Gideon continued. He's been with me for 3 years. I put him in position 8 months ago as a contingency for exactly this kind of sequence. Someone I could trust to be in a room near you and report what he heard. A brief pause. He heard everything. Dante's hand was around the phone. His knuckles ached. Let her go, he said. I'm going to need the ledger access, Gideon said, and I'm going to need Dr. Ashcroft to clarify certain technical details about the biometric annotation. 2 things, Dante. Give me those 2 things, and this ends cleanly. And then what? And then you walk away. Permanently. From the syndicate, from the city, from everything you built. You disappear, which, given the federal warrant that just went live 20 minutes ago, is your best available option regardless. His voice was almost gentle. It's over. I'm offering you a version of over that includes your survival. What about her survival? A pause that lasted too long. That depends on how cooperative you are, Gideon said. Soto had moved closer to Dante. She couldn't hear the call, but she was reading his face with the practiced compression of someone who has conducted a career's worth of interrogations and interviews and had learned to extract maximum information from minimum signal. Her hand was on her own phone. Dante met her eyes. He had 6, maybe 5 men left. No money. A federal warrant. A deputy director of the FBI who needed his cooperation more than he needed hers, but whose leverage had just become his leverage. A forensic financial ledger that 3 different parties wanted for 3 different reasons. And a man on the other end of a phone who had spent 9 years in his organization and understood exactly how Dante made decisions under pressure. What he would sacrifice, what he wouldn't. Gideon knew he wouldn't sacrifice Serena, had always known it. Had made Serena the final piece of the architecture for that exact reason, holding her back until every other piece was in place. I need to know she's unharmed, Dante said. A sound on the line, movement, a door, footsteps, then Serena's voice, compressed and tight but functional. I'm fine. Don't... And then Gideon again, 24 hours. That's how long I'm giving you to arrange the ledger transfer and meet me to discuss the annotation details with Dr. Ashcroft present. Another pause. After that, my patience becomes a liability. The call ended. Soto said, "Where is she?" "I don't know yet." He looked at Brennan. "Tom, the man on the radiator at Lincoln Square. Who picked him up? Gideon's people or Haas's people?" Brennan pulled out his phone. He was already typing. "I'll find out. If it was Haas's team, they processed him through federal custody, which means there's paperwork, which means Soto can find the location in the processing record." Dante turned to Soto. "How fast can you access Haas's operational logs?" "If Haas is using a federal facility, 20 minutes. "Do it." He was already calculating routes, resources, the geometry of where Gideon would take someone he was using as leverage, somewhere contained, somewhere with exit options, somewhere Dante couldn't flood with personnel because Dante no longer had personnel to flood with anything. Gideon would choose a location he controlled absolutely, and the locations Gideon controlled absolutely were locations Dante had given him over 9 years of organizational trust. He thought about that. The locations he'd given Gideon, the keys and access codes and building arrangements that had passed through his consigliere's hands across 9 years of daily operations. He thought about the steel mill, Lakeside, 40 minutes south of the city. The Valen Syndicate had used the facility for secure meetings for 7 years. It was off-record, off-network, accessible by 2 roads that could be monitored from the building itself. Dante had shown it to Gideon in the 2nd year of his tenure when Gideon had needed a location for a sensitive sit-down with a Detroit affiliate. He'd trusted him with the address, the access protocol, the security blind spots. He'd trusted him with everything. "I know where she is," Dante said. Soto looked at him. "How can you—" "Because I gave Gideon every asset this organization has ever had," Dante said, and the flatness in his voice was the flatness of a man who has finished being surprised. "I gave him everything. The question is whether that means I also gave him the thing that ends this." He looked at Brennan. "Do you have a car?" "Outside." "Then we're going." He looked at Soto. "You're coming with me. Your team. How many people can you move without going through Haas's command structure?" 6 agents I trust completely. Get them moving. I'll give you the address en route." He was already walking. No sirens, no federal vehicles, and no contact with Haas or anyone in his chain until we're already inside. Soto fell into step beside him. Marcus followed. Brennan was already on the phone. They moved through the warehouse toward the exits, and behind them the empty building sat in its rust and its damp, indifferent to the particular quality of what had just been decided in it. The moment when a man who had built his entire existence on the principle of never surrendering anything understood that the only play he had left was to walk unarmed into the place where everything he'd lost was waiting. Not as a mafia boss with leverage and resources, as the one person in the world who knew exactly how Gideon Rusk thought because he'd spent 9 years teaching him. The drive south took 38 minutes, and Dante spent all of them in the front passenger seat of Brennan's car, doing the thing he'd trained himself to do under pressure. Not planning, exactly, but clearing. Stripping out everything that wasn't immediately useful, and leaving only the shape of what was true. What was true? Gideon had Serena. Gideon was at the steel mill. Gideon wanted the ledger access and the annotation details, which meant he hadn't yet transmitted the full Rotterdam transition package to whoever in Rotterdam was waiting for it. He was still assembling the final components. That was the window. Not a large window, not a comfortable one, but a window. What was also true, Gideon had been inside the syndicate for 9 years. He knew how Dante moved. He knew what Dante would sacrifice and what he wouldn't. He had positioned Serena as the final leverage point precisely because he understood that she was the one variable that would make Dante walk into an unfavorable situation without adequate preparation, which meant Dante walking in was expected, which meant Dante walking in as expected was the worst possible approach. He turned to Soto in the back seat. "Your 6 agents, what's their capability?" "Tactical, 2 former military, 4 field trained. They're carrying standard issue plus." "Communication?" "Encrypted channel. Haas can't access it." "When can they be at the location?" Soto checked her phone. 40 minutes from now if I send the address in the next 5 minutes. "Send it." He gave her the address. "Tell them to approach from the Lakeside access road, not the main road. There are 2 entry points to the property. Gideon knows about the main road. The lakeside approach he might know about or might not, depending on how thoroughly he went through the building records. He paused. Tell them to hold position until they hear from me directly. No movement, no communication, nothing that announces they're there. And if we lose communication, then they use their judgment. He turned back to face forward. But I need Gideon to believe I came alone. I need him focused on what I'm bringing, not on what's surrounding the building. Marcus, driving, said, "You're going in." "Yes." "Unarmed." "If I go in armed, the first thing that happens is a search and a demonstration of who has the leverage." He looked at the road unspooling ahead of them. "Unarmed, I walk in as a man who's already made the calculation Gideon wants me to make. I look like someone who has accepted that the game is over." "Have you?" Brennan said quietly from the back. Dante didn't answer. The steel mill was visible from a mile out, a low, sprawling complex of corrugated metal and brick, an exposed structural steel that sat against the lakeshore like something the land had tried to digest and given up on. It was lit from inside, warm amber light bleeding through the high industrial windows, which meant Gideon had powered the facility, which meant he'd had time to prepare, which meant the 24-hour window he'd offered on the phone had been theater. He'd been moving people into position since before the call. Dante had Brennan stop the car 800 meters from the main entrance. He got out. The wind off the lake hit him immediately, cold, sharp, carrying the smell of rust and water. He buttoned his jacket. He was not wearing a wire because Soto had offered one and he'd refused on the grounds that if Gideon's people found it, Serena would pay for the discovery. And that was an unacceptable exchange. 30 minutes, he said to Marcus through the window. If you don't hear from me, assume the situation has changed and coordinate with Soto. Marcus's expression said several things. His mouth said, 30 minutes. Dante walked toward the mill. The main entrance was a sliding steel door wide enough for industrial vehicles, currently standing open by perhaps 6 feet, enough to enter, not enough to see what was on the other side until you were already through it. Standard containment positioning. He'd used it himself, in this building, in other buildings, over 15 years of meetings that required control of sight lines and movement. He stopped in front of the gap. I'm coming in, he said. Not loudly, the acoustics of the building would carry it. A pause of 5 seconds. Then a voice from inside, not Gideon's, one of his men. Hands visible. Dante raised both hands to shoulder height and walked through the gap. The interior of the mill was vast and cold and smelled like a decade of industrial disuse, oil residue and oxidized metal, and the specific staleness of closed spaces. The main floor was perhaps 200 feet long, with a network of catwalks running at 2 levels above, and along the far wall a row of defunct machinery that cast long shadows under the overhead lights that had been strung from the ceiling supports, temporary LED arrays, the kind used for construction sites, giving everything a harsh, flat illumination that left no comfortable ambiguity. Gideon was standing in the center of the main floor. He was not alone. Dante counted 6 men on the main floor, positioned at intervals that suggested preparation, not improvisation. On the upper catwalk level, the movement of at least 2 more. And beside Gideon, with her arms at her sides and her face doing the flat, controlled thing that meant she was conserving herself for when it mattered, was Serena. She looked at him when he came in. Her eyes moved to his hands, visible and empty, and then back to his face, and the calculation she was running was transparent to him in a way that it probably wasn't to anyone else in the room. She was assessing not whether he'd come armed, but whether he'd come with a plan, and what the plan required from her. He gave her nothing visible. Not yet. You came alone, Gideon said. He sounded almost satisfied. You have something I can't replace, Dante said. Gideon looked at him for a moment. He was dressed as he always was. Well-fitted, precise, the kind of clothing that communicated a man who considers his presentation an operational tool. He looked, Dante thought, exactly as he had looked in the Meridian Tower office, and in every meeting, every debrief, every conversation over 9 years. There was no villain's transformation, no outward evidence of the architecture underneath. He had always looked like this. The face had always been this face. That was its own particular kind of horror. Put him down, Gideon said to the nearest man. The search was thorough and professional. No weapon, no wire, no phone. Dante had left the phone in the car deliberately because the phone's location data would give Soto a fixed point, and the absence of it would give Gideon one fewer piece of information about who knew what. "Clean," the man said, stepping back. Gideon nodded. "Walk with me." Dante fell into step beside him, which put them moving toward the far end of the main floor with Serena and two of Gideon's men following at a distance that was close enough to be controlling and far enough to allow the illusion of conversation. "The ledger access," Gideon said. "Biometric confirmation on a device I'll provide. Once confirmed, the encrypted servers unlock remotely and the contents transfer to a Rotterdam receiver. 30 seconds, total." "And the annotation details." "Dr. Ashcroft will explain the clinical documentation to one of my associates who has the technical background to understand it. 40 minutes, maybe less." He glanced at Dante. "Then you both walk out of here." "What about Voss?" A pause. "Dana Voss is a complication I'm managing separately. She's a federal agent. She's a federal agent who has been working two directions for 11 months and who is now going to have a difficult time explaining her conduct to either direction." His voice was matter of fact. "Her credibility as a witness is manageable." They stopped near the machinery along the far wall. Up close, the equipment was enormous. Stamping presses and forming machines that in their working lives had shaped steel into components and now stood as large, inert monuments to a different industrial era. The space between them created a kind of corridor, narrow and shadowed even under the overhead LEDs. Dante stopped walking. "I need to know it ends with her safe," he said. "Not your word. Something that makes it structurally true." Gideon turned to face him. "There's nothing structurally—" "The record," Dante said. "The backup copy she made. She has it somewhere outside the hospital system, somewhere you can't reach. If she doesn't check in by a certain time, it transmits." He watched Gideon's face. "You know that's true. You've been trying to get to her for 6 weeks, and she's still breathing, which means she's been protected by something other than luck." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "The backup transmits to whom?" he said. "I don't know," Dante said. "And that's the point." He let that settle. "You get the ledger access and the annotation details, but the dead man's switch stays active until Serena chooses to deactivate it herself from a position of safety after she's confirmed that she and I are both clear." He met Gideon's eyes. "That's the structural guarantee. You need that switch deactivated as much as you need anything else, probably more, because if it transmits, everything you've built transmits with it." The temperature of the room changed, not physically. The LEDs still threw the same flat light, the lake wind still pressed at the building's seams. But the weight of the air between the two of them shifted, Gideon recalibrating, assessing, running the same arithmetic he'd been running for 9 years and reaching a different result. "You came in here to negotiate," Gideon said. "I came in here because you have her," Dante said. "The negotiation is what I have instead of a gun." Something that might have been, in another life, a kind of professional respect moved across Gideon's face. It was there and gone. 20 minutes, he said. "I need to make a call." He moved away. 2 men stayed close to Dante. Across the floor, Serena had been positioned near a structural column, standing, the 2 men flanking her at arm's length. Dante looked at her. She looked back. She dropped her eyes to the floor briefly. Not submission, it was too deliberate for submission, and then raised them to the upper catwalk on the south side of the building, and then back to him. 1 second. Then she was looking at a middle distance again, her face composed. He'd understood. The south catwalk. She'd seen something, or someone, or noticed something about the catwalk that mattered. He didn't look up himself. Looking up would be read by the men watching him. He looked at his hands instead. He turned them over, palms up, looked at them the way a man looks at his hands when he's buying time, and in his peripheral vision, he tracked the south catwalk and saw what she'd seen. A shift in the shadows near the access ladder, the kind of shift that meant weight was being redistributed. That meant someone was up there who was trying not to be noticed. Not one of Gideon's men. Gideon's men were positioned and visible and professional. They weren't hiding on catwalks, they were standing in sight lines. Someone else was in the building. His mind moved fast through the options. Soto's team was supposed to hold at the lakeside approach. Marcus and Brennan were 800 meters out. Reyes was in federal custody. Kellerman was gone. Which left one person who knew this building, who knew the access points, who might have moved faster than any timeline Dante had constructed. Because she hadn't been part of any timeline. Because she'd been making her own decisions since before Dante had found her on a bridge. He almost looked up again. He didn't. Gideon came back across the floor, phone in hand, and there was a change in him, a slight acceleration in his stride, a compression in his expression that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. "Change of plan," Gideon said. Dante waited. "Rotterdam has moved up the transfer window. We have 2 hours instead of the remainder of the day." He looked at Dante with the specific look of someone who has decided that management is taking too long. "I need the confirmation now." "I said I needed 20 minutes to arrange." "I heard what you said." Gideon gestured to the man on Dante's left. "The device." The man produced a tablet, commercial hardware modified. Dante could see the additional ports, the non-standard casing. The biometric confirmation would require fingerprint and retinal scan both, based on the sensors visible on the device's face. Once given, the server's unlocked. 30 seconds, as Gideon had said. Not reversible. Dante looked at the device. He looked at Serena across the floor. She was watching him with absolute focus, and he understood that she understood what the device meant, and that she was calculating the same thing he was calculating, which was whether the dead man's switch was sufficient protection against a man who was now accelerating his timeline. Acceleration meant pressure from Rotterdam. Rotterdam pressing meant the people in Rotterdam were nervous. Nervous people made decisions faster and thought them through less. And accelerated timelines were how careful, layered plans developed gaps. He needed to find the gap. "Dr. Ashcroft confirms the annotation details first," Dante said. "You get the biometric confirmation after. That was the arrangement." "The arrangement has changed." "Then we have a problem." The quality of the room's silence shifted again, this time with the specific tension of men waiting for a signal, hands moving toward positions, weight redistributing across the floor. Serena said, "I'll do the annotation walkthrough now." Everyone looked at her. She said it with the same flat clinical composure she'd used in the diner at 6 in the morning, the voice of a woman choosing to contribute a variable to the situation that no one had anticipated her contributing. Gideon looked at her. "Now you're cooperative." "I've been thinking about it," she said. "I want to be out of this building. If walking through the annotation gets me out of this building faster, I'll walk through the annotation." She looked at Gideon steadily. "Bring your technical person." A pause. Gideon gestured to one of the far men, who moved toward a door at the side of the main floor. A second person came through the door. A slight man with glasses and the coloring of someone who spent his working life in front of screens. He was carrying a laptop and had the look of someone deeply uncomfortable with the sensory environment he'd been placed in. The technical person. Rotterdam's specialist. Serena looked at the man. "Sit down," she said, with the authority of someone who has spent 11 years telling people to sit down in emergency rooms. The man sat on a machine casing. "I'm going to walk you through the intake documentation. I need you to tell me when you have enough information to do what you need to do." She was moving toward the man, and the 2 guards flanking her moved with her, and she was crossing the floor diagonally, not toward Dante, not toward the doors, but toward the southeast corner of the building, where the technical person was sitting, which put her directly below the south catwalk. Dante understood. He moved at the same moment, not toward Serena, the opposite direction, toward Gideon, because Gideon was the control point, and Gideon needed to be looking at Dante when the south catwalk became relevant. "The ledger," Dante said, stepping toward Gideon, close enough to make the 2 nearby guards adjust their positions. "I want to talk about what happens to the people connected to it, the ones who aren't Rotterdam, the ones who've been using it for money channels. Some of them are people with families who don't know what their fathers or husbands do. If this transmits and those names surface, that's not my concern," Gideon said. "It's not your concern because you've never had to look at anyone's face when the consequence landed." Dante's voice stayed flat, but he was closer now, 2 feet from Gideon, and the guards had moved to bracket him rather than position for a clean shot, which was what he needed. "In 9 years, have you ever personally delivered bad news to anyone? Or did you always arrange for someone else to be in the room?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "Don't try to humanize." The south catwalk let out a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just the groan of old metal accepting weight in a way it hadn't recently. And one of the two guards near Serena looked up, which was the moment Marcus came through the east access door at ground level. Not hidden, not tactical, simply present, walking fast, and the room's attention fractured along three directions simultaneously. What happened in the next 40 seconds was not clean. The guard nearest to Dante moved first, not toward Dante, but toward Marcus, which was a positional error born from training that prioritized known threats over present ones. And Dante used the full 2 feet of distance between himself and Gideon to close it in one movement, his left hand on Gideon's right arm and his right hand on the device. Because the device was the thing that mattered, and if Gideon transmitted the ledger access in the next 90 seconds, none of the rest of it was relevant. Gideon was not a physical man, had never needed to be, had always had the structure around him to perform that function. But he was not passive. He drove an elbow back hard into Dante's ribs, which connected, which hurt with the specific bright clarity of cracked bone, and Dante held on. From the catwalk above came Dana Voss, not falling, descending the access ladder on the south side with controlled speed, weapon drawn, which explained the shadow shift and the catwalk noise, and why she had not been at the lakeside approach. Because she had never been at the lakeside approach. She had been inside the building for longer than any of them had been outside it. "Federal agent!" Her voice filled the building. "Weapons down!" Not all of them complied. 2 of the far men raised weapons toward her, and then Marcus was between them, and something that had been building since the moment Marcus had walked through the east door detonated into a collision of bodies and noise, and the flat percussive crack of a gunshot that went into the ceiling and brought a rain of rust and insulation down from the rafters. Dante got the device out of Gideon's hand. Gideon's second elbow connected with Dante's jaw, and the world tilted sharply to the left, and Dante's grip on the device slipped, and for 3 seconds, 3 very long seconds, the device was in the air between them, and Gideon reached for it, and Dante reached for it, and what determined who got there first was not speed or strength, but the angle. And the angle was Dante's because he'd pulled left when the elbow hit, and that put him closer to where the device fell. He got it. He put it behind him, inside his jacket, against his spine, and turned to face Gideon with the ribs screaming and the jaw already swelling, and the understanding that this was the moment the geometry simplified. Gideon looked at him. He was breathing harder than usual. He looked, for the first time, maybe the first time in 9 years, like a man whose calculation had produced an unexpected result. "You planned this," Gideon said, not accusatory, almost wondering. "The whole approach. Walking in unarmed. You knew Marcus was coming through the east door. You knew Voss was on the catwalk." "I knew Voss was in the building," Dante said. "The catwalk was her choice." "How long did you know?" "I knew about Voss when I was still in the car." He was keeping Gideon's attention on him because behind Gideon, Serena was moving, away from the technical person, away from the southeast corner, toward the door through which the Rotterdam specialist had entered. And the guards who'd been flanking her had both redirected toward the active confrontation at the center of the floor, and she was moving fast and quiet. "I didn't know about Marcus until I saw him come through the door." Gideon blinked. "That wasn't coordinated," Dante said. "No, Marcus doesn't coordinate. He makes his own decisions about when to be in a room." He held Gideon's gaze. "It's a quality I've valued for a long time." On the floor behind them, the situation was resolving in a direction that could be called controlled if you were being generous. Voss had positioned herself with coverage of the central floor. 2 of Gideon's men were down and not moving. The others had assessed the tactical situation and were in various stages of making the calculation that Kellerman had made that morning. And Marcus was bleeding from somewhere on his left side, but was still standing and still making eye contact with every man in the room who still had a weapon, which was the specific quality that made Marcus indispensable. And then the secondary entrance at the far end of the building, the one that accessed the lakeside road, opened, and Soto's 6 agents came through in a stacked formation that removed any remaining ambiguity about the direction the room's momentum was traveling. Gideon looked at them. He looked at Dante. He looked at the building around him, the industrial space he'd chosen for its controllability, its sightlines, its limited access points, all of which had just been rendered irrelevant by the specific incompleteness of his intelligence about who was where and when. The Rotterdam transfer, he said. His voice was flat now, the professional surface stripped off, something underneath that was not quite desperation, but was adjacent to it. If it doesn't execute in the next 90 minutes, they'll assume the operation is compromised. They have a contingency, a secondary extraction that involves pulling every asset and every contact in North America simultaneously, every name, every transaction, gone into a format that's not my problem, Dante said. Gideon looked at him. It becomes your problem when every corrupt official they've been managing decides that the exposure risk requires them to act preemptively. You have people connected to this network. Your former people, your former channels. Gideon, Dante's voice was quiet. Final. Stop. A pause. The building breathed around them, the lake wind against the walls, the settling of old metal, the sound of Soto's agents moving Gideon's remaining men toward the walls with the efficient choreography of people who do this for a living. It's over, Dante said. Gideon stood very still. Then, from the direction of the side door, there was a sound, a short, sharp crack that was not gunfire and not structural, and the lights went out. All of them. Every LED array, every overhead light, the entire temporary electrical installation that Gideon had set up, gone simultaneously, and the building dropped into a darkness that was almost absolute. The high industrial windows letting in the ambient gray of the lakeside sky, not enough to see by, barely enough to know which direction was up. Dante dropped to one knee by reflex. Someone was moving fast in the dark to his left, and he had a half-second to understand that the technical man, the Rotterdam specialist, the slight man with the glasses, had not been moved toward the wall with the others, had been near the side door when the lights cut, and was now somewhere in the dark between Dante and that door, and was carrying the laptop that contained whatever pre-staged data the Rotterdam group had prepared for the transfer. Dante moved toward the door. Behind him, flashlights were coming on. Soto's agents, standard kit, and the beams swept the floor in moving columns of light that revealed the space in fragments. A fallen man, an overturned case, the shadow geometry of the machines along the far wall. He reached the door. Through it, a corridor 20 feet, another door at the end, the cold smell of outside air under the door's edge. He pushed through. The specialist was 6 feet ahead of him, moving for a vehicle that had been positioned at the building's service entrance. A dark SUV, engine already running, someone in the driver's seat who had been waiting for exactly this. The specialist reached the vehicle, got the door open. Dante was close enough to see the laptop in his hand and the data cable trailing from it, plugged into something inside his jacket, and he understood in that last second that the transfer didn't require the building's electronics. It required the laptop and a cellular signal and the biometric confirmation that he'd taken from Gideon's device. And the biometric confirmation was still pressed against his spine inside his jacket. And if the specialist had a secondary confirmation method, the specialist turned. He had a secondary device, smaller, palm-sized, the same sensor array as the tablet, but compact. He raised it toward Dante. Not as a weapon, as a scanner. Dante threw himself sideways at the same moment the device activated, and the scanner's light swept the space where his face had been. And he hit the ground hard on the broken asphalt of the service entrance and rolled and came up with the device in the specialist's hand as the only priority that existed in the world. He got his hand on the specialist's wrist. The laptop hit the ground. The SUV driver was opening his door, and Marcus came through the service entrance behind Dante at a dead run, bleeding and breathing in the ragged pattern of a man who had been doing very physical things for the past several minutes and was choosing not to stop, and went past Dante entirely and hit the SUV driver before the man's feet were fully on the ground. And the driver went back into the vehicle and the door swung shut, and Marcus held it shut with his body weight and said, with extraordinary calm given the circumstances, "I've got this one." Dante looked at the specialist. The man was on his knees on the asphalt, holding his wrist, the scanner on the ground between them. Dante picked up the scanner. He picked up the laptop. The data cable was still connected to the device inside the specialist's jacket, and he pulled it free. And when the connection broke, the laptop screen, which had been showing a progress bar above the word initializing, went to an error state. Transfer interrupted. 40 seconds. He became aware that he was breathing very hard and that the pain in his ribs had gone from bright and specific to a continuous dull roar that was going to be significantly worse in an hour when the adrenaline finished what it was doing. He became aware that the asphalt was cold under his knees and that the lake wind was pulling at his jacket, and that somewhere inside the building, Soto's voice was issuing instructions with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been waiting a long time to issue them. He became aware, a moment later, that Serena was standing in the service entrance doorway. She was looking at him, at his hands, at the laptop, at the condition of his face. Her expression was doing something he hadn't seen it do in all the hours since the bridge, something that wasn't controlled or flat or strategically composed. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked at his hands. She was right. The fall on the asphalt had opened the skin across his right palm. "It's minor," he said. "I know it's minor." She crossed the distance between them and took his hand without asking, turned it over, examined the wound with the automatic focus of a trauma surgeon. Her fingers were cold and precise and completely steady. "The ribs. Probably cracked, not broken." "You don't know that." "I know what broken ribs feel like." She looked up at him. They were close, closer than the diner, closer than the bridge, the physical distance down to a foot, a breath, the specific proximity of two people who have been orbiting each other for a night and a day and 12 years. "It's done," he said. She held his gaze. "The transfer didn't execute. Soto has the building. The Rotterdam specialist is on the ground behind me." He paused. "It's done." She looked at him for a long moment. Her hand was still holding his, not examining anymore, just holding, the clinical purpose fulfilled and something else taking its place that neither of them commented on. "Gideon," she said. "Soto has him." She nodded, once. She looked down at his hand, then released it. From inside the building, through the service entrance, came the sound of multiple voices, agents coordinating, the particular cadenced efficiency of a federal operation reaching the stage where the variables have been contained and the paperwork begins. Soto's voice, clear and directive, the sound of doors. And underneath it, almost beneath the threshold of hearing, the lake. Patient, indifferent, the same as it had always been. Dante looked at Serena. She was looking at the sky above the mill, the gray blue of early evening, the light dying in the west, the flat expanse of the lake going dark beyond the building's roofline. She was breathing steadily, her shoulders down, her hands at her sides. She had the look of someone who has been running for a very long time and has just stopped, and the body hasn't understood yet that it's allowed to. "The dead man's switch," he said. "Where did you send it?" She looked at him. "Soto's office. Washington. Encrypted, scheduled for 11 p.m. tonight." A pause. "I sent it 3 hours ago before I went back to the apartment." He stared at her. "You knew," he said, "when Gideon took you. You knew the record was already transmitted." "I knew that whether or not anything happened to me tonight, the information would reach someone who wasn't Haas." She said it plainly. "I stopped being the thing that needed protecting about 3 hours before you decided I was the thing that needed protecting." He looked at her. She looked back. Behind them, the SUV driver, still inside the vehicle, Marcus still holding the door, said something muffled and unhappy. Marcus said something in response that was shorter and more final. "We need to go back inside," Serena said. "Yes." Neither of them moved for another moment. The lake wind moved between them, and the light continued its slow withdrawal from the sky, and the building behind them held its noise and its heat and its accumulation of the night's consequences. And out here on the broken asphalt of the service entrance, it was just cold and quiet, and the specific exhaustion of people who have been holding themselves at maximum tension for too long and have not yet found the moment to let go. Dante's ribs hurt. His jaw hurt. His hand was bleeding. He thought about a child named James who had lived 9 days. He thought about a kitchen table in Evanston and the particular quality of 3 weeks when he had been something close to a person. He thought about 12 years. "Serena," he said. She looked at him. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have the words yet, and the words he had weren't sufficient, and he'd spent 15 years in a world where saying things that weren't sufficient was more dangerous than saying nothing. But she held his gaze, and something in her face did the thing it had done on the bridge. That second, private understanding, the one she hadn't been willing to trust then. She was willing to trust it now. The service entrance door opened wider, and Soto appeared in the frame, professional and focused, and said, "I need both of you inside." And the moment folded itself away into the night and the work that remained. Dante followed Serena through the door. Behind them, the lake went on doing what it had always done, dark and patient and entirely unconcerned with what had just been decided on its shore. The inside of the mill was a different place with the lights back on. Soto's agents had restored power through a portable generator hauled in from the lakeside vehicles, and the LED arrays came back up in sections. First the south end, then the center, then the north, each bank of lights revealing the room incrementally, the way a photograph develops, detail by detail. What they revealed was not dramatic. It was the ordinary aftermath of violence. Men sitting on the floor with their hands behind their heads, equipment cases overturned, the technical specialist still on his knees near the wall where an agent had positioned him, his glasses missing from his face, and his expression the expression of a man who has just understood that the organization he worked for had very finite loyalty to individuals who got caught. Gideon Rusk was seated in a chair near the center of the floor. An actual chair, the kind brought in for exactly this kind of controlled situation, which said something about how thoroughly Gideon had prepared the space and how completely the preparation had inverted on him. His wrists were cuffed in front. He was sitting straight, his posture unchanged from the Meridian Tower office, as if even now he considered his presentation an operational tool. Marcus was against the east wall, jacket off, while one of Soto's agents with field medical training pressed a folded cloth against the wound on his left side. It was a graze, long, ugly, the kind that bled considerably without being serious, and Marcus was enduring the attention with the patient tolerance of a man who has been injured in working conditions before and considers it an occupational reality rather than an event. Dante came in from the service entrance and took in the room in one sweep and then looked at Soto, who was on the phone in the southeast corner with the low, rapid efficiency of someone managing several conversations simultaneously. She held up one finger without looking at him, 1 minute, and he stood and waited, which was harder than anything he'd done in the past 4 hours because the adrenaline was finishing and the body was beginning its accounting. Serena moved past him toward Marcus without hesitation, with the directed focus of a surgeon who has spotted the most pressing clinical need in the room. She spoke to the agent treating him, looked at the wound, asked 2 questions that Marcus answered in monosyllables, and then took over the pressure application with the calm authority of someone who does this professionally and has never confused calmness with indifference. Marcus looked at Dante over her head. The look said, "She's good." Dante looked away. Soto finished her call and came toward him, phone still in hand. She looked the way competent people look after a significant operational event, focused, slightly elevated, the adrenaline metabolizing into forward momentum. "Washington received the transmission at 8:47 p.m., she said. "The director's office has been briefed. We have federal teams moving on the Rotterdam principles in 3 cities, New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. The international requests are going through diplomatic channels in Rotterdam and Antwerp as of 40 minutes ago." She paused. "The biometric data in Dr. Ashcroft's annotation is being processed by a forensic specialist out of the D.C. field office. Preliminary confirmation that it matches Arndt Voss came in 20 minutes ago." "Voss is in custody?" "New York. He was at a hotel in Midtown. He didn't run. I don't think he believed anyone had gotten to the chip data." She looked at him steadily. "He's going to need a very good lawyer." "What about Haas?" "Paul Haas was picked up at O'Hare at 7:15 p.m. He had a bag packed and a ticket to Toronto." She said it without satisfaction, the flat, factual delivery of someone who finds no pleasure in the arrest of a colleague who has spent years betraying a trust. "He's going to be a significant piece of the federal case. The cooperation agreement he made with Gideon gives us documented evidence of the task force's internal corruption going back at least 3 years." Dante looked across the room at Gideon. Gideon was looking at the floor in front of him, not slumped, not defeated in any visible physical sense, but inward in a way Dante hadn't seen before. A man running the final calculations, working out what remained, what could be managed, what the shape of the next phase would be. "What happens to him?" Dante said. "Federal prosecution." RICO, conspiracy, obstruction, the financial charges. The ledger documentation alone is going to take 2 years to fully process. Soto's voice was even. He'll spend a long time in a federal facility, Mr. Vallon. Whatever he built, it's not going to survive him. Dante nodded. And me, he said. Soto looked at him. She didn't look away, and she didn't reach for a reassuring tone. You've been running a criminal organization for 15 years. That doesn't disappear because you cooperated tonight. She paused. What cooperation buys you is a conversation, a framework. The U.S. Attorney's Office will want to talk to you about the scope of your cooperation, the financial documentation, the political contacts, the network structure. That conversation determines what the next several years of your life look like. Not freedom. Not immediately, no. She held his gaze. But something, which is more than you had this morning. He thought about that. He thought about Kellerman's voice on the phone, the arithmetic doesn't work in your favor, and about the vault exploding against the river sky, and about the 14 months Gideon had spent constructing the architecture of his dismantlement, and he thought that Kellerman had been right about the arithmetic and wrong about what the arithmetic was for. Dr. Ashcroft, he said, her cooperation, the transmission, the annotation documentation, that counts. It counts significantly. Soto said it without hedging. She spent 11 years building a life under a constructed identity, under circumstances that were not her fault, and that resulted from a deliberate deception by a man who is now in federal custody. The U.S. Attorney's Office understands the distinction between a witness in danger and a criminal actor. She paused. She's going to be fine, Mr. Vallon. That part I can tell you with confidence. He exhaled slowly. Across the room, Serena had finished with Marcus and was standing with her arms at her sides, looking at nothing in particular, doing the things she did when she was processing, the outward stillness that he recognized now as not emptiness but compression. She was compressing a night's worth of events into a form she could carry. Soto said, I need you to come with me now. There are agents outside who are going to transport you to a federal facility for the initial booking. It'll be a long night. I know what a long night looks like. Yes. She almost smiled, not quite, but adjacent. I imagine you do. She moved away to coordinate the transport. Dante stood for a moment in the center of the mill floor in the flat LED light, with the sounds of the operation moving around him. Professional voices, the shuffle of people being positioned and processed, the ordinary machinery of consequence arriving. He walked towards Serena. She turned when he was 3 feet away. She'd known he was coming, had probably been tracking him in her peripheral vision the whole time, which was what careful people did when they were pretending to look at nothing. Soto says you're clear, he said. I know, she told me. She looked at him, at his face, which was swelling on the left side where Gideon's elbow had landed, at his jacket, at his hands. You need a hospital. Later. The ribs won't get better without imaging. I know. He held her gaze. I'm going to federal custody tonight. There'll be medical staff. She absorbed this without visible reaction, the specific quality of someone who has already processed the information and is now waiting for the conversation to reach the place it's actually going. When did you know? He asked. About the transmission. That you'd already sent it before Gideon took you. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him. I worked out what the record contained about 4 months ago. I had a forensic biometrics paper sent to me by a colleague, unrelated, purely academic, and I read it, and then I sat in my car in the hospital parking structure for 45 minutes. She paused. I knew what I was carrying. I also knew that the moment I tried to do anything with it, I'd be making a decision that I couldn't unmake. Her eyes were steady. So I built the transmission package, set it up so I could trigger it from my phone or let it execute automatically at a designated time. And then I waited to understand what I was waiting for. What were you waiting for? She looked at him for a long moment. To know whether you were what Gideon told me you were, she said, or what I'd started to believe you were in the years after, when I'd had enough distance to think clearly. A pause. I'd been watching the syndicate from the outside for a long time, not obsessively, just aware, looking for evidence that pointed one direction or the other. She paused again. The bridge told me what I needed to know. I could have been sent there to finish the job Gideon started. You could have been, but you weren't, and you didn't know that I'd know the difference, and you still put yourself between me and the vehicle before it went up. She said it plainly, as a statement of observed fact. That told me something. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to be away for a while, he said. The inadequacy of the phrasing was not lost on him. Away, as if he were traveling for work. I know. I don't know the exact shape of it yet. The cooperation agreement, it depends on how much I give them and how they assess it. He looked at her. It could be a year. It could be more. I've been waiting 12 years, she said. I know what waiting looks like. Something in his chest did the thing it had done on the bridge, that mechanism that had been running without his knowledge. Stopping. Except this time it didn't stop with the quality of loss. It stopped with the quality of something arriving after a very long transit. He didn't say what he wanted to say, because the LED light and the federal agents and the sounds of the operation were not the right context for what he wanted to say, and he had learned, in 15 years of saying things in the wrong context at the wrong time, that the timing of a thing changed the thing itself. The lake, he said instead. She looked at him. There's a place on the lakeshore, he said. We used to talk about it, in Evanston. You said you'd never seen the lake at sunrise, and I told you it was worth seeing. She was very still. When this is done, he said, whenever that is. Her eyes held something he hadn't seen in them before, or had seen once 12 years ago, at a kitchen table in a rented house, and had never expected to see again. Okay, she said. One word. Quiet and without ornament and completely sufficient. Soto's voice came from across the room. Mr. Vallon, we need to move. He held Serena's gaze for one more second, then he turned and walked toward the door. The federal facility was in the Loop, a building that looked like an office complex and functioned as one, with the additional quality of having rooms designed for the specific purpose of containing consequential conversations. Dante was processed with professional efficiency, photographed, printed, medical assessment that confirmed 2 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture in his jaw that required nothing but time, then a room with a table and 2 chairs and a cup of coffee that had been sitting too long. He sat in the chair that wasn't the visitor's chair. The U.S. attorney arrived at 11:40 p.m., a woman named Carvel, 50s, with the quality of someone who has been doing this long enough that the gravity of any individual case has resolved into a kind of steady professional engagement. She had a file and a legal pad and a recorder that she placed on the table without asking. You understand your rights, she said. Not a question. I've been in enough rooms to understand my rights. She nodded. Then let's talk about what cooperation looks like. They talked until 3 in the morning. Dante gave her the financial architecture, the offshore structure, the distribution network, the political contacts, the layers of shell companies through which the syndicate had operated for 15 years. He gave her names and dates and account numbers and the specific geography of how money moved through the system he'd built. He gave her Gideon's arrangements with Rotterdam in the detail that only the person who'd built the original infrastructure could provide. He did not minimize what the syndicate had been or what he had been at its center. Carvel didn't ask him to. She asked precise questions and wrote precise notes, and occasionally stopped to clarify a detail, and the conversation had the quality of a very long reckoning conducted at a professional distance. Not confession, not absolution, just the careful unpacking of 15 years of architecture by the man who understood it best. At one point she stopped and looked at him. You understand that the scope of this cooperation is significant, she said. The Rotterdam network, the federal corruption component, the financial documentation. This is a substantial package. I know what it is. It doesn't erase the underlying conduct. I know that too. She looked at him for a moment with the assessment of someone recalibrating slightly. What changed? She said. Tonight. You had options this morning that most people in your position would have taken. Run, negotiate a personal exit with Rusk, cooperate minimally, and limit the exposure. She set her pen down. You didn't take any of them. Dante thought about how to answer that. He thought about Serena standing on a bridge in the rain. He thought about a 9-day life he hadn't known existed. He thought about Gideon's voice saying operational, not personal, and the specific coldness of a man who had organized his understanding of the world so thoroughly around the absence of consequence that he had lost the ability to locate where the consequences actually lived. "I had someone to stop being," he said. Carvel picked her pen back up and didn't ask him to explain. Barcine. The cooperation agreement took 11 days to finalize. During that time, Dante was held in federal custody, which was not comfortable and was not meant to be, but which had the quality he described to Serena, a long night that had a shape to it, a trajectory, something that was moving toward a specific point rather than simply continuing. On the fourth day, Brennan came to see him. They sat in a visiting room with a table between them, and Dante thought about how many tables there had been in the past several days, tables in rooms designed to contain consequences, and thought that he had apparently reached the stage of his life where tables were the primary furniture. "Reyes is out," Brennan said. "The weapons charge didn't hold. Haas's team planted it, and Soto's people were able to document the plant within 48 hours. Good. He's been asking about you." Brennan looked at the table. "A lot of people have been asking about you." "What kind of asking?" "The kind where they want to know what happens next." He looked up. "The syndicate it's not functioning, Dante. The federal freeze, the arrests, Kellerman and the others pulling back, there's nothing to function. The people who were connected to it are trying to figure out where they land." "They land wherever they land," Dante said. "There's no syndicate to go back to." Brennan was quiet for a moment. "Some of them have families. Legitimate work they could go back to if—" "Tom." Dante looked at him. "The cooperation agreement includes provisions for people who can document their roles as peripheral, non-violent, non-directorial. Carvel's office is processing them. Reyes qualifies. A few others." He paused. "The ones who made the choices Kellerman made, that's different. But the ones who were working the margins because it was the work available to them, there's a path." Brennan exhaled. It sounded like something he'd been holding for a long time. "What about you?" he said. "The agreement it's not finished yet. But the shape of it is a sentence with time already served counted and cooperation credit applied." He said it the way he said anything that was simply factual, without dramatizing the weight of it. "A year, maybe less with the full credit. After that, monitoring, conditions, the kind of existence that has supervision built into it for a while." Brennan nodded slowly. "You're okay with that," he said. It was not quite a question. "I spent 15 years building something that I've spent 4 days dismantling," Dante said. "Whether I'm okay with it is the wrong question. The question is whether I would do it differently." He looked at the table. "I wouldn't. Not the last 72 hours. Everything before that is more complicated." Brennan stood. He put out his hand across the table. Dante looked at it for a moment, then shook it. "Take care of Reyes," Dante said. "Always have." He left. Gigit. On the 7th day, Soto came. She sat across from him without a file or a legal pad, just herself, in the same efficient coat, with the expression of someone who has resolved several operational questions and has now arrived at something more personal. "Gideon Rusk entered a not guilty plea this morning," she said. "Of course he did. His legal team is good. They're going to make the case complicated and long." She looked at him. "But the documentation is substantial. Yours, Dr. Ashcroft's, Brennan's, the financial records from the ledger, the Rotterdam transaction logs." She paused. "Complicated and long doesn't mean uncertain." "How long?" "The trial, maybe 18 months from now. The sentence, if the jury does what the evidence suggests they should, a long time, Dante. A very long time." She said his name, which she hadn't done before. "He's not coming out of this into anything that resembles what he built." Dante sat with that. He looked for something in himself that resembled satisfaction and found, instead, a specific quietness. Not peace, that was too large a word for what it was, more like the absence of the mechanism. The thing that had been running without his knowledge, that had run for 12 years on the fuel of a loss he hadn't been able to fully name, was still. "Dr. Ashcroft," he said, "she's been reinstated at Mercy General. The constructed identity has been formally dissolved. She's Serena Ashcroft again on every document." Soto paused. She gave testimony to Carvel's office that was, thorough is the word I'd use, thorough and precise and delivered without a single unnecessary word. Something moved in Soto's expression that was close to appreciation. She's a remarkable person. I know. She asked about you, Soto said. Not in a way that required an answer, just asking. He looked at the table. Tell her the shape is getting clearer, he said. Soto nodded. She stood, buttoned her coat. One more thing, she said. The Rotterdam prosecution, the international component. The biometric data from Dr. Ashcroft's annotation has now been verified against the full registry. Arend Voss's identity is confirmed. The accounts are being accessed by international financial authorities in 4 countries. She looked at him. The number of people whose conduct is going to be exposed through that ledger is significant. Politicians, financiers, law enforcement in 2 countries. It's going to take years to fully process. And Serena's annotation is the thread that pulled it all loose, Dante said. Yes. He thought about a woman sitting in a hospital parking structure for 45 minutes, holding the knowledge of what she was carrying and deciding what to do with it. 11 years of building a life in the margins of the world, and at the center of it, without knowing, and then knowing, evidence that would ultimately matter more than anything the Valen Syndicate had ever built or destroyed. She saved more people than I ever hurt, he said. He didn't mean it as a balance sheet. He wasn't trying to weigh the arithmetic in his favor. He said it because it was simply true, and because the truth of it had a particular quality that he wanted to say out loud once, in a room with a witness. Soto looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. She did. She left. The agreement was signed on the 11th day. It was a document with specific language, cooperation, disclosure, sentencing recommendation, conditions of release, monitoring period, that had the quality all consequential documents have, the compression of enormous things into precise sentences that carry their weight quietly. He read every word before he signed it. Carvel watched him read without impatience. He signed it with the same hand that was still healing across the palm. He served 8 months. The facility was in Wisconsin, north of Madison, the kind of federal institution that was designed more for containment than punishment, which was not comfort exactly, but was functional. He read. He slept more than he'd slept in 15 years. He had supervised conversations with Carvel's office twice a month, working through the remaining details of the financial documentation, cross-referencing accounts and dates and names, until the structure of everything he'd built had been rendered completely legible to people whose job it was to dismantle it. Marcus came once. He sat in the visiting room with his arm in a sling. The Greys had nicked more than they'd initially assessed, damaged a tendon, required 2 surgeries, and looked at Dante with the expression he'd always had, which was the expression of a man who has made all his decisions in advance and is simply present in the consequences of them. You look rested, Marcus said. I sleep. Huh. Marcus looked at the room around them. 8 months. 8 months. And after? Monitoring. Conditions. I can't leave Illinois for the first year. I have to check in monthly. He paused. It's not nothing. It's a life, Marcus said. Yes. Marcus looked at his hands. He'd always been a physical man. The stillness of recovery sat on him like borrowed clothes. I've been helping Brennan with the peripheral people, the ones Carvel's office is processing. I know, Reyes told me. Some of them are going to be fine, young enough, no violent history. They can build something else. He paused. Kellerman's not going to be fine. He cut a deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office, but the deal doesn't make him fine. It just makes him present. Dante thought about Kellerman's voice on the phone, the arithmetic, the daughter in college, the wife with medical bills, the specific calculation of a man choosing survival over loyalty and understanding in the moment of the choice that the 2 things had stopped being compatible. He made the choice he could live with, Dante said. That's all any of us do. Marcus looked at him. You've gotten philosophical. I've had 8 months. Marcus almost smiled. It was brief and it was real, and it was the kind of smile that cost something, the kind you only got from people who had been through enough to understand what a smile was worth. He didn't stay long. The visiting conditions didn't allow long, and Marcus was not a man who extended things past their useful point. He stood, shook Dante's hand, not the formal valedictory handshake of Brennan, but the quick, firm grip of two men who understood each other at a level that handshakes couldn't fully represent, and left. He was released on a Tuesday morning in October. The air outside the facility was cold in the specific way of Wisconsin in autumn, clean and hard-edged with the smell that had no city in it. A car was waiting, a rental, arranged through Carvel's office as part of the release logistics, and he stood beside it for a moment before getting in because he had been in rooms for 8 months and the sky above him now was very large, and he wanted to acknowledge that before he started moving. He drove south. He was in Chicago by early afternoon. The city received him the way it always had, indifferently, with its normal machinery running regardless of who was passing through it. He had an apartment arranged in Wicker Park, a 2-room place with no history attached to it, the kind of location that was simply functional. He would check in with his monitoring officer in the morning. He had conditions to meet and a year of them ahead of him, and after that a life whose shape was not yet determined. He put his bag down in the apartment and stood in the empty room. He called Serena. She picked up on the second ring. "You're out," she said. "Since this morning." A pause. Not an uncomfortable one, the comfortable kind, the kind between people who have run out of the need to fill silence. "How are you?" she asked. "Rested." He thought about Marcus's expression and almost smiled. "Strange. The city looks different when you've been away from it." "It doesn't actually look different," she said. "You just see it differently." "Yes." Another pause. "The lake," she said. "Yes." "Tomorrow," she said. "Sunrise. There's an access point in Lincoln Park, North End, past the harbor. I'll be there at 5:45. I'll find it. You've always been good at finding things," she said, and then, quietly, before he could respond, "Good night, Dante." "Good night." The call ended. He stood in the empty apartment with the phone in his hand and the city moving outside the window, its lights, its traffic, its million overlapping lives doing their evening things. He had lived in this city for 30 years and run one of its most powerful criminal organizations for 15 of them, and had believed, for most of that time, that the city and the organization were the same thing, that what he built was what he was, and what he was what he'd built. He understood now, with the specific clarity of 8 months and several hundred very long nights, that they had never been the same thing. The organization was a structure, brick and money and leverage and fear, and he was a man, which was different, which had always been different, even when he'd done everything in his power to make the difference invisible. He put the phone down. He looked at the window. He thought about tomorrow. It was dark when he got to Lincoln Park, and cold the way October was cold, and he found the access point and the path that ran along the harbor's north edge, and he walked it in the dark with his hands in his pockets, and the sound of the lake to his right, not visible yet, just present, the low, continuous sound of water against the breakwater. He arrived at 5:38. Serena was already there. She was standing at the edge of the path where it opened onto a concrete pier facing east, her hands in the pockets of a dark coat he didn't recognize. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the lake, at the horizon where the sky was beginning its first very tentative shift from black toward something almost perceptible, the earliest suggestion of what would become light. He came to stand beside her. She glanced at him once, a quick lateral look that took in his face and his coat and his hands and the quality of him standing there, and then looked back at the horizon. They stood in silence for several minutes. The lake was enormous and dark and moved with the patient rhythm of something that had been moving since long before either of them existed and would continue long after. The wind off it was cold enough to make itself known, and he could feel it on his face and the back of his hands, and in the specific place in his ribs that still ached in cold weather. The sky at the horizon began, imperceptibly at first, and then with gathering intention, to change. "Gideon's trial starts in March," she said, not looking at him. "I know." "I'll testify." "I know." A pause. "Are you afraid of it?" "No," she said. And then, "I was afraid of a lot of things for a long time. What Gideon told me, what you might have been, what it meant that I'd been wrong about which thing to be afraid of." She was quiet for a moment. I'm not afraid of being in a room and telling the truth about what I know. I've been doing that in one form or another for 11 years. He looked at the horizon. James? He said. She was still for a moment. Yes. Tell me about him. He said it quietly. If you want to. What you remember. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer, and he was prepared for that. It was her to offer or not. And the offer had to come from her, and he had spent 8 months learning, in the particular way you learn things when there's nothing else to do, the difference between what he needed and what he had a right to. He had... She stopped, tried again. He was very small. They had him in the NICU because his lungs weren't developed enough. I could hold him, but I couldn't. There were tubes and monitors, and I kept thinking, I'm a doctor. I should know how to help this, and I couldn't help at all. She paused. I talked to him, the whole time. I told him things I hadn't told anyone else. I told him about his father. She glanced at Dante for a second, then back at the water. I told him his father didn't know he existed, and that wasn't anyone's fault, and that the world was harder than it looked from the inside of a neonatal ward, but that it also had the lake in it, and the lake was worth seeing. Dante's throat was tight. I didn't know you were quoting me, he said. I wasn't at the time, she said. I'd forgotten you'd said it. I only remembered later. She paused. That was the strange part. I thought I'd let you go completely, and then I was in a hospital bed talking to a 9-day-old child about a lake, because somewhere underneath everything, I was still carrying what you'd said about it. The sky was changing in earnest now, the first pale line at the horizon, the darkness lifting by degrees, the lake's surface beginning to emerge from obscurity into something that had color and texture and depth. He didn't say that he was sorry again. He'd said it once, and it had been true, and saying it again would be filling space with sound instead of meaning. He stood beside her and watched the sky open. The sunrise on Lake Michigan was not a gentle thing. It came in hard and horizontal, the light cutting across the water with the directness of something that had no interest in being decorative, just light, doing what light did, reaching everything it reached without preference or selection. It turned the water from black to gray to a specific color that was between silver and copper, and that had no good name in any language he knew. He heard her exhale slowly. There it is, she said. Yes. She turned to look at him then, fully, directly, the way she hadn't quite allowed herself yet. She looked at his face in the early light, at the jaw that had healed without perfect symmetry, at the lines in his face that 8 months had not erased, at whatever it was that she was looking for. He looked back at her and did not look away. What do we do now? She said. It was not a helpless question. It was the question of a woman who has survived significant things and has not lost, in the process, the capacity to understand that surviving them is not the end point, that beyond the survival there is a life that needs to be lived, and that the living of it requires the same quality of deliberate choice that the surviving did. I don't know yet, he said, but I think we start from here. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the lake. He turned back too. They stood at the edge of the pier in the morning light, two people who had been shaped by the same catastrophe from different angles, who had each built something functional and necessary out of the absence the other had left in them, and who were now standing at the beginning of something that had no blueprint and no precedent and no guarantee. The light was still coming in. The lake went on. Chicago woke up behind them at its own speed, indifferent as always, grinding forward in the way cities do. After a while, she moved slightly. Not toward him, not away, just a small shift in position that closed the distance between them.